Hey there guys, it's Klay here back with another video. Today I will read chapters 6 to 10 of What If Naruto Was Flung Far Back in Time. More information about the author of the story is in the video description. Anyways, I will now begin. Chapter 6. Start. Naruto perked up from his position on the ground. Tobirama was coming alone and that had never happened before. The blonde had been balanced on his hands, trying to practice his ability to stay still enough to safely collect nature energy from any and all positions. He was also trying to learn how to enter Sage mode faster. It would really help while in actual combat situations. As Tobirama approached, he tilted his attention towards the other ninja, facing him when he broke into the clearing. "What's up, Tobi-kun?" Naruto asked with a wide grin, knowing exactly how much Tobirama enjoyed Hashirama and Mito's pet name for him. "Don't call me that," he grumbled as he approached. "And Hashirama is with Mito." Naruto smiled at that. He was glad the older Senju was able to spend time with the girl that was to be his wife. He was still baffled about that one, but he didn't comment. After all, he was from a completely different time, with different customs and traditions. He really didn't have much say. "So what bring you here? Want to spar?" Naruto asked brightly, getting into a teasing stance. Tobirama remained serious as he waved a hand to placate the excitable teen. "No, not right now. Perhaps a little later. I actually came here to tell you about something Hashirama and I have been discussing for some time now." The white-haired Senju explained. Naruto sensed the seriousness in the boy's chakra. Well, Tobirama was always serious, but today he was even more so. It prompted the blonde to sit down, gesturing for Tobirama to do the same. The Uzumaki clan is very closely allied with the Senju clan, almost like extended family in a sense. "You already know this," Tobirama began. "Hi." Naruto agreed, wondering where exactly this was going. That aside for the moment, all five of us have come to the same realization, even though none of us have exactly discussed it. That we're going to have to split up soon, and seek training elsewhere. Naruto stated quietly, and the Senju nodded solemnly. "Hi. As such, Madara and Izuna will receive training from their clan, and the same as likewise for my brother and I. Your clan, the Uzumaki, was not something you've ever experienced. Hashirama and I got to thinking that perhaps, there's a way to get you a clan of your own, some place you can go to and call home until Konoha is built." Tobirama gave him a soft smile. "I imagine that with the destruction of the Uzumaki clan, a lot of their records were lost as well?" Naruto merely nodded. There wasn't much he could say about the Uzumaki, and he felt ashamed about that fact. He was, after all, one of the only surviving members. Well, in his time he had been. Thought as much. Anyways, within the Uzumaki, there are a group of shinobi and non-shinobi alike, who travel the elemental nations, under no one's control or influence but their own. They seek new things, new sealing methods, new jutsu. It isn't always very specific, and the Uzumaki are a clan not much like any other. They're called the Wandering Fraction. Tobirama elaborated, his tone growing if possible even more serious than before. Years can go by before a group of them will check in with the clan head. They all have ridiculously long lifespans, so it's not uncommon to find that an Uzumaki's perception of time differs greatly than that of, say, a Senju. I suppose it doesn't help that they're very energetic and can't really sit still for long periods of time. "How does this apply to me?" Naruto asked, a small idea flickering to life in the back of his mind. To the Uzumaki, family means everything. To them, they're brothers and sisters, not merely a clan. Your chakra will gain you access. They will accept you without much questioning. We've already laid the foundations. All that's left now is the introductions. Tobirama replied, and Naruto tried not to choke in surprise. When he managed to wheeze out, "The Uzumaki." He was going to go train with the Uzumaki. "Madara and Izuna," Tobirama muttered. "We'll have to say goodbye to them first. They already know this is coming, this separation. We could all feel it." Tobirama sighed. "I guess we could, and we didn't need sensing abilities to do that either." Naruto replied quietly, turning his gaze to the sky. "It's sad to think that the next time we really see each other, after we say goodbye, we'll be as enemies on the battlefield. Only until we're all the clan heads of our respective families," Tobirama offered, trying to lighten the mood. "I mean, the Uzumaki are in need of an heir, and the fact that there hasn't been one announced yet means that Mito's father is still looking for someone to impress him. You have that uncanny knack for shocking the hell out of people. I bet if you just did that meditation thing that you do, then they'll worship you as a living kami. They can't comprehend sitting still for so long. It's just not in their nature, which makes me surprised that you learnt the ability at all. Tobirama cracked a smile at the small joke, but Naruto burst out laughing. For some reason, when it was said by the younger Senju, it was always so much funnier. But the laugh itself was tainted with the sad realization of their reality. The next time they all saw each other together, that was goodbye. The air was heavily with the tension of what could not be said. Silence had reigned for nearly 10 minutes, and Naruto bit his bottom lip before sticking out his hand and offering it to the Uchiha brothers. "Stay safe. Kick ass, but stay safe," he said with a large grin. Madara blinked at him before a slow, small smile tugged at his lips. "And to think that's the brat that tries to take over your world." Kyuubi scoffed from the far corners of Naruto's mind. "Shut it, fuzzball," Naruto replied mentally, grasping Madara's hand and giving it a firm shake. He and the Kyuubi had gotten to the point where they spoke outside of his mindscape, and it mostly consisted of the fox voicing his opinions on the Uchiha. They weren't always very nice. "Till the moment we're ready," Madara stated quietly, his meaning all too clear. "Till the moment we're strong enough to build Konoha." The moment Madara let go of his hand, Izuna and the older Uchiha disappeared, using their newly learned Shunshin. Something that not even Naruto had known in his time, having never really been taught the jutsu due to being occupied with learning other things. Hashirama had fallen into a state of depression, while Tobirama steadily ignored that fact. The younger Senju grasped Naruto's shoulder before letting go and gesturing for them to start walking. Naruto was going to be meeting the Senju clan today, and to say he was nervous would be the understatement of all understatements. He fiddled with the bag that contained the meager amount of things he'd managed to accumulate while in this world. Among them being his original clothing, as he now wore something a little less orange and something far more standard for the time period he was in. He had, however, refused to give up the shoes, the kunai and shuriken from his time, the shards of the first Hokage's necklace, the odd wooden cylinder that upon inspection had revealed to have been created by Hashirama, and to have a seal complex integrated into its design, and his copy of Ero Sennin's book, the one that had given him his name. Maybe that was why they didn't run through the trees, hopping from branch to branch. They walked along the ground like any civilian would, moving at about the same pace. Naruto wasn't sure if this actually made him feel better or worse. The anticipation, though, of meeting both the Senju and the Uzumaki, was almost unbearable. There was Batsuma, a man who could easily, and often did, send children to their deaths. Not that he had any choice, Naruto just couldn't see past that fact. Then there were the Uzumaki, a clan Naruto was a part of but essentially knew nothing about. Hashirama and Tobirama had refused to say anything. All they'd said was that the Uzumaki were different and that Naruto would understand once he got there. He didn't know what the hell the two had said to their father and the Uzumaki clan head, and he really hoped he didn't screw up, but he was just glad that no one was deciding to kill him on sight. That was more than a relief. He did realize that by officially joining a clan, there was no going back. He was in this till the end. He would become a part of history. It had only really hit him that he wasn't going back the night after Tobirama had told him he was going to the Uzumaki. He wasn't going to see his friends ever again. Essentially, he wouldn't live long enough. And even if he did, he'd probably be senile or something. He wouldn't even recognize them. And they wouldn't know him. It was a rather depressing thought. But he accepted it because honestly, what could he do to change it? So he couldn't change where he was, but it wasn't like he minded. The Senju and the Uchiha had become family to him, forming bonds as tight and if not tighter than the ones he'd had with Sasuke. They were going to build Konoha together, bringing the Uzumaki, the Senju and the Uchiha together and start the process of peace. It was all Naruto could ask for, it was all he would strive for. But he's realized that by joining a clan, he'd also have to join the wars. He could only hope that he didn't have to kill anyone. Knock them out, sure, but kill? He really, really hoped that he wouldn't have to resort to such extremes. Naruto was shocked, silently shocked, that the Uzumaki clan head was a tall skinny old man with a long beard. His hair was very nearly completely gray, as his general expression seemed to be a peaceful sleepiness. Naruto immediately liked the man, even though he'd been expecting someone a little more boisterous. "You have the Uzumaki chakra all right," Mito whistled. "More than most in fact. Kami loved you." "Hush Mito-chan. Not just yet. The clan head placed a wrinkled hand on his daughter's head and she snuggled into his side, demanding an embrace. Naruto was sweating bullets while Hashirama and Tobirama watched from the sidelines, laughing their asses off silently. They were laughing so hard they were clutching at their ribs, but they had to remain quiet because they didn't want to attract Batsuma's attention. The man just looked like he had a sour disposition and Naruto could not find it within himself to fully trust him, as he no doubt did not trust Naruto. "So, you are part of the wandering fraction," the Uzumaki head commented. A stray thought entered Naruto's mind and he paused to consider it for the briefest of moment. If there were so many wandering Uzumaki, it would explain why every now and then an Uzumaki would pop up out of nowhere in Naruto's time. But he didn't dwell on it. This was an important conversation. "Hi. Well, my parents more than me, but they were attacked by an enemy clan while I was away, looking for some ingredient or other. My mother liked to cook, you see, and she had a rather specific taste. When I got back." Naruto let his voice trail off regretfully. "That is most unfortunate. I regret your position, Gaki." The clan head's voice was deeper than his skinny stature suggested it would be, and Naruto got the impression that it would really boom if it needed to. "Nah, it's okay. Mostly." Naruto allowed pain to overcome his voice before hastily clearing it away. "They always spoke of the clan. Never said too much about it, just passing remarks. I'm afraid I don't even know much about my heritage. My mother always said she'd teach me later, when I was older, but..." He allowed his voice to choke off at that point. In his mind he had to be careful as to what he was referring to because while his words were lies when seen as merely his words, his thoughts were not. For instance, Jiraiya had been the one to tell him he'd teach Naruto sealing but had died before he could. If he outright lied, the censors would pick it up and the Uzumaki were full of them. "So you don't know sealing?" Mito whispered, her eyes wide throughout the tale. Naruto shook his head at that but got confused when her chakra began to whip around in excitement at that. She was very good at containing herself, however. "Well then, Gaki, I guess we should get you started. An Uzumaki who doesn't at least know some sealing isn't much of an Uzumaki at all." A hand clamped down on his shoulder and Naruto glanced at it in surprise before a large grin spread on his face. "Tell me first though." The clan head's chakra was the one whipping around in excitement this time and Naruto bit his bottom lip to keep his amusement in. "How is it that you have blonde hair?" Mito's father's expression reminded Naruto of an excited child told to behave or he wouldn't get his present. What was the big deal? Tsunade Bakken had been blonde and she was Mito's granddaughter. "My father. He wasn't Uzumaki." Naruto shrugged. He'd also been told, at some stage in his life by Sakura, that the red hair gene was regressive, possibly reappearing in his lineage many generations down. But hadn't the Uzumaki been known for their fiery red? Oh well, it was as it was. Was he a shinobi? Mito asked curiously. "Hi. He taught me one of his best moves." "No, Jiraiya did. My Okawa-chan was also a very good shinobi but I didn't learn much other than her taijutsu style." He'd been told the two were similar. "They always said we have time." He added with a shrug. Hashirama had told him that the Uzumaki's perception of time was warped. His exact words had been, "Actually the Uzumaki are a bit different. I think you'll understand once I get you in there. They lived so ridiculously long that to them, most things could and usually would wait till later. But they did know when it was time to get serious." Like when Mito had loudly informed her father that Hashirama and Tobirama had found a lost Uzumaki, the members of the clan that had been visiting delayed their departure long enough for Naruto to get there. "Ah, such is the unfortunate fate of all living things. Time is your own, until it is not." The clan head murmured, and strangely enough, it made sense to Naruto, but he could see from the Senju's faces that while they did not really understand the words, they were used to them. "What if they don't believe me?" Naruto blurted. The 16-year-old had never been good with rejection. "Then you run like hell and when I become clan head I'll let you become a Senju. Mito can teach you sealing." Hashirama smirked, an expression he'd learned from Madara. The conversation came unbidden to Naruto's mind and his smile widened. So far, he felt completely at ease, most of his earlier tension having been sapped away by the surprisingly comforting presence of the Uzumaki clan head. Mito suddenly leaned towards Naruto, sniffing him closely before turning back to her father. "He's got a lot of chakra. And his potential is perhaps the greatest in the clan," she stated in confusion. "Unless I'm wrong. Do you have any sensing abilities, Uzumaki Naruto?" "Hi, somewhat." Hashirama said it was an Uzumaki thing, but I'm afraid I don't even know very much about being an Uzumaki. Naruto admitted sadly before his tone hardened. I'm willing to learn though, Datbeo. Naruto's determination was shining in his eyes in all its glory, and Hashirama smiled at the sight. That boy really was something. His exclamation seemed to have confirmed something for the watching Uzumaki, because they all burst out laughing. Welcome home, brother, the clan head said with a hearty laugh. No one could fake the chakra in that little catchphrase. It's just too much of a reflex in most Uzumaki. Naruto found himself in a bone-crushing hug from someone much shorter than him and was surprised that Mito had such strength. Tonight, brothers and sisters, we celebrate the return of one of our own and the presence of our Senju cousins. A feast? Tobirama muttered, eyes lighting up with recognition. The two brothers had moved closer to Naruto, as the clan head had made his declaration. Dark eyes turned to the blonde in an expression of utter adoration. I love you, man, I officially love you. Hashirama? Naruto squeaked in alarm, not at all used to seeing that sort of behavior from the younger and usually more stoic Senju. Mito finally detached herself from him so that she could attach herself to the older Senju. You'll understand once you try their cooking. They have some kami-given talent for food. It's indescribably amazing. Hashirama's eyes had sort of glazed over, and Naruto figured he wasn't going to get any more than that. He wondered if anyone had managed ramen yet. Come, brother. A male Uzumaki happily grabbed Naruto. You must learn sealing, something, anything, before the night wanes, and a happy sun greets us tomorrow. I will teach you myself. No. Tobirama yelled. He coughed when he noticed his audience. I think perhaps, it would be better, if you introduced Naruto-kun to some of the more, finer, delicacies that life has to offer. The strained statement appeared to Naruto as though the younger Senju was borrowing the Uzumaki he was addressing's words. The Uzumaki paused for a moment before nodding to himself and smiling brilliantly. Yash, I shall go start cooking immediately. He's the best cook, Hashirama informed a confused Naruto. Tobirama turned a horrified gaze towards them. And to think he almost didn't cook tonight. The Senju cut off with a shiver. Sooner or later, Naruto was going to have to learn all their names. But from what he'd seen, they reminded him of Guy-sensei. No wonder he didn't mind the Jonin's antics so much. They were in his blood. Why wasn't Nagato this fun? Naruto got to try firsthand the Uzumaki's prowess in the metaphorical kitchen. The Uzumaki were blessed by kami indeed. This was almost better than Ichiraku ramen. Datbeo. Almost. His mouth had felt like it was in the heavenly wonders of all things gracious in this world. Naruto resigned himself to learning how to cook as well. When the food was just this good, there was no wasting a chance like this. Besides, he did know how to make ramen, so this was only adding to his knowledge. You just simply could not argue with good food. And his decision to learn the Uzumaki way of life in all areas, including cooking, seemed to make the Uzumaki even more welcoming of him, if that were even possible, since he'd voiced it to Mito, but he'd never been the softest person, so they'd all heard him. Naruto found that the Uzumaki had some amazing recipes for inarizushi as well as some other things that he thought Madara might like. Izuna did whatever Madara did, so he figured their taste as food was similar. So he wrote them down and sent a shadow clone with them to the Uchiha compound to give them to Madara. Since most of the shinobi didn't know something as basic as a henge and the Uchiha were too arrogant to use their Sharingan while in their own compound, Naruto went relatively undetected. Madara decided to learn how to cook as well, surprising those in his family. Naruto snickered when he thought about what the history books would say about them. Insanely powerful, glorious in battle, the greatest ninja to ever walk the elemental nation since the Sage of Six Paths, and coincidentally would make very nice housewives. Naruto, to the Uzumaki, was like a toy, a new shiny blonde toy. Everyone wanted to teach him something of anything, and he'd never experienced that before. From failing at the academy to bribing Jiraiya into deeming him something worth training for the Chunin exams, Naruto had never been given help without asking so freely before. On the way there, someone came up to him and said, "I'm going to teach you how to run." "Run?" came the somewhat stoic reply. "Yes, run. Now before you scoff, just know, you don't know how to run until you've had to run from a bunch of angry Akimichi whom you've just ruined their dinner. Simply running is not enough. Ask any Uzumaki, they'll tell you what happened." Naruto couldn't help but laugh at that. He could only imagine what an angry Akimichi was like. But that wasn't all his new clan members wanted to teach him. They seemed particularly sore about his not knowing any ceiling. Mito came up to him at some point and the attention subsided slightly. "They're trying to distract you. Is it working?" she asked quietly. "Distract me, from what?" Naruto blinked in confusion. "Your pain. You hide it well behind large smiles, but we can sense that in here." She placed a hand over his heart. "You are in pain." Naruto froze for a moment before relaxing and giving the younger Uzumaki girl a bright smile. "I will be all right. You shouldn't worry about me. Losing family is painful. Your pain is our pain, as is the way of the Uzumaki. You'll come to understand soon enough." Mito informed him with a sagely nod. Sensors. They were all sensors, and a person's chakra reflected their inner thoughts to some extent, and depending on the sensor, they would be able to pick up on this. Well, Naruto was going to have a hard time keeping secrets. Or maybe they'd allow him to keep his past to himself. Colors. That was the first word that popped into Naruto's mind upon entering the Uzumaki compound. Everything was utterly plastered with the brightest of colors. If they were going for stealth, they'd fail miserably. He noticed, though, that none of the colors on the buildings were red. That honor was left to their iconic hair. Now that he was actually within the walls of the compound, those that offered to teach him doubled their efforts in earnest. Naruto didn't know what to do, so he did a rough estimation of the amount of people that were eager to impart their knowledge to him and created as many Kage Bunshin. There was instant silence, fascinated and curious silence. They popped pretty easily. Naruto explained with a hand moving to the back of his head to rub at it sheepishly. He poked a clone a little too hard. "See? But I get all their memoirs when they return to me. So I could teach any one of these and it'll go back to you?" Mito asked with wide eyes. "Hi." Naruto agreed. "If you want, you can try it. Just go with one of them to where I can't see you and then dispel it." "Nah, I trust you. It's your loss if it doesn't work because we may live long, but we're impatient as ever. We'll only teach you once." Mito grinned at him. A puff of smoke somewhere near the back and a ghost of a giggle informed Naruto that his clones were now the newest form of entertainment for the rather excitable clan of red-haired shinobi. "So, tell me, Gaki." Naruto looked up from his task as the quiet yet deep voice addressed him. He'd also slowly gotten used to the fact that most of the Uzumaki referred to him as Gaki. He supposed that to them, his 16 years of age hardly meant anything at all. "How does the learning go?" the clan head continued. Naruto chuckled, rubbing the back of his head. He'd been at the Uzumaki compound for a week, mostly just trying to get used to this new way of life. "It's going well, considering the new favorite pastime is to pop the clones by using creative and elaborate pranks. I'm waiting for the day one of those pranks actually catch the real me." Naruto answered with a smile to show he meant no real harm in the words. The clan head chuckled. "It is a rather interesting technique and you use it well. It suits the Uzumaki greatly." He hummed to himself. "The information must be quite exhausting to simulate though." Naruto shook his head at the older Uzumaki, noting the concern in the clan head's tone and feeling warmth spread through his chest because of it. "I'm used to it and, besides, I just meditate at the end of the day. Give it all time to settle in my mind and stay where it's supposed to." Naruto explained with a soft smile. "Meditate? That absurd practice of sitting still?" Naruto laughed, having felt that way about meditation himself. He'd ignored Iruka-sensei when the man had tried so diligently to explain the benefits to him, and he'd always goofed off when Kakashi-sensei had tried to get the team to have relaxation time or something like that. When Ero Sennin had been writing his books, he'd often suggested Naruto meditate, perhaps his own way of trying to prepare Naruto for sage training. Problem was, each time Naruto had scoffed it off and deemed it a waste of time, until he'd been forced to learn the technique the sage mode way. No movement at all, and to the Uzumaki, the idea was utterly unthinkable. "It's helpful." Naruto shrugged, not about to get into a debate about senjutsu. "If you say so, Gaki." The clan head replied doubtfully. However, he began with a twinkle in his eyes and a small mischievous smile on his lips. "It'll be quite the party trick, sitting still that is." And Naruto supposed that it would. Mito especially would probably love it. He wondered if any of the others could actually sit still like he could. He'd noticed that fairly quickly. They fidgeted more than he did. They reminded them of when he was younger. He hadn't really understood how much he'd matured until he'd come here. He was a quiet soul among the loud affections of a family larger than anything Naruto had ever dared to hope for. He'd walk through the compound, amazed at the simple everyday life activities. A group of giggling girls, comparing the results of their tie-dye, would be sitting in a yard while their mothers sat a small distance away, laughing and talking of things Naruto could only guess at. But by their boisterous body language he got the idea that it was exciting and eventful. Men would walk arm in arm, singing to the skies just because they could. Occasionally a red-haired Uzumaki woman would join in, adding a harmony to the mix that was lacking with only the deep rowdy tones of the men. Or a particularly opinionated and aggressive woman would loudly proclaim they were being publicly indecent and proceed to whack them upside the head but smiling sweetly all the while. There were friendly brawls in the streets, laughing spectators cheering the body fighters on. And body they were. Decorum meant nothing. They said what they wanted and when they wanted, a lie never passing their lips nor even crossing their minds. They were honest to each other and that made them all so much closer. A true bond that cultivated an understanding beyond anything Naruto had ever seen before. Naruto had been particularly delighted with the way everyone greeted the other with loud, enthusiastic waves and well wishes. Everyone actually and truly cared for the other. He wouldn't say that the Konoha he'd grown up in was a cold and cruel world, but the people had been their own, relying on those immediately around them and giving help to an even more select few. Shinobi had been bound by a sense of duty and trained in a set of morals and bound by a code they'd sworn themselves to. That was not the same as an essential stranger walking up to a person and handing them a stick of dango merely because they looked like they were thinking of getting some. Naruto had come to realize, was extremely rude to not accept a gift among the Uzumaki, and a refusal was a reflection on one's inner feelings towards the other. This emotional connection was centered on the sensing ability. Not all Uzumaki had it, but enough of them did that it was hard to hide anything, to keep secrets, to lie. So they'd changed and adapted, forced to become a family deeply connected to each other so that it was no longer necessary to lie. Each sensor was different, had a different radius and strength. Naruto cheerfully learned that his was one of the strongest in the clan, with the potential to grow even stronger. So there never was a moment alone, never a moment of privacy. It could not, exist in their world. A technique known by one was more than likely to be known by most. If one needed help, all Uzumaki would offer it to you. Betraying one member was like betraying them all. Naruto hadn't really sat down and thought about it all, the complexities that were the Uzumaki. He'd only been there a week, so he still hadn't learned everything, experienced all that there was in the Uzumaki clan. He was standing at the foot of a mountain, about to climb it. The plan had been for him to become the clan head, which would mean impressing the right people and catching up on all the things he was 16 years behind on and had essentially never known. He had to learn their ways, their culture. They did missions too, and he was sure that he'd be sent out on those sooner or later. He knew he wouldn't be able to leave the compound with at least one person knowing about it. So that meant his training was completely open to the clan. He didn't want to think about that because he was afraid his thoughts would lead him down a dark path neither he nor the Uzumaki deserved. Was he alright with the whole clan knowing all his strengths and weaknesses? Brat. Kurama's voice only served to further remind him that there was more that he had to worry about. Would they treat him differently because he was a Jinchuriki, something no one in this world even had a concept of? You're forgetting that you are supposedly of the wandering fraction. All you need do is tell them that you're not used to staying in one place and they may let you wander the surroundings on your own. Thanks Kurama. Naruto replied with a mental grin at the fox. Currently he was learning a Daten Jutsu, which he had a small affinity for. He even had some affinity for water but absolutely not affinity for lightning or fire. That was another thing about the Uzumaki, they were completely varied in their affinities. They weren't like the Uchiha or the Nara in that everyone was pretty much guaranteed to be the same. What they did share was the ability to do Fuinjutsu, Kenjutsu, sensing, high stamina and their longevity. Naruto planned to master as much as he could as fast as he could. He didn't have time to waste. He needed to prove that he was worthy of being the clan head. He also had to keep in mind that his end goal was Konoha, with both Madara and Hashirama, the Uchiha and the Senju. He needed to remain focused on those things. He'd only been here for a week, so he was still learning, but from what he'd seen so far, he liked it. This was his family, and he was their brother. This was his home away from homes. Chapter 6. End. Chapter 7. Start. Naruto never spammed the shadow clone technique more than he spammed it while with the Uzumaki. He created about 3 clones per shinobi willing to teach him anything in fuinjutsu, which was almost all of them, as most of them took his lack of sealing knowledge like a personal insult. They were particularly interested in that technique, but they never asked Naruto to teach it, which Naruto found weird, but he never said anything about it. If they wanted to know how to do the Kage Bunshin technique, then they would ask. The original Naruto asked one of the Earth-style Uzumaki to create a spike for him, like the ones he had learned how to meditate on with the toads. And that was where he sat while his clones learnt the art of fuinjutsu, keeping still so that his mind could absorb all that he learned. The Uzumaki admired the fact that he could be still for such long periods of time, and Naruto was amazed that none of them had ever considered meditating. They were all brilliant in intellect, but not one of them could sit very still for very long. While he meditated, he could always, at any given moment in the day, sense several Uzumaki watching him intently. It was the most entertaining thing for them, aside from popping his clones. Naruto had been invited to speak with the head of the clan on many occasions, and after 6 months with the Uzumaki he became his personal apprentice, something he was told was a great honor. Naruto had a silly grin plastered on his features for over 2 weeks. Mito was the one to teach him the Uzumaki customs. Naruto thought it was hilarious that they had the most lax way of being formal he'd ever seen. He'd been to a few of the clan compounds later on in his life with Shikamaru, Choji, Ino and Kiba, so he knew that it was quite the occasion to have guests over to dinner. The second time Naruto had been brought before the clan head, he'd sweated bullets, trying to remember how to be formal, since the first time he'd been far too concerned with his surroundings and the words that he'd been saying. It wasn't easy, and he'd gotten a full belly laugh for his troubles. After that, Naruto came to realize that the Uzumaki had a different sort of culture, one that was intriguing and meaningful. They were all family to each other. They gave without expecting anything in return. Yet Naruto knew that they had a temper that could rival the Kyubis. He'd seen it in action when a husband returned home late from a night out with the guys. His wife, well, he wondered if his own father had had to endure a temper like that. But an Uzumaki temper was the very definition of passion. It burned hot and it burned bright, but it also burned out very quickly. It was there and then it wasn't. Only after a suitable punishment had been delivered. Turned out the Uzumaki were also proficient at Kenjutsu, and most of them had great fun popping Naruto's shadow clones with many different kinds of swords, much to the blonde's annoyance since they usually did it while he was learning something. Naruto himself had fun showing them just what stealth meant. When asked why anyone would ever want to hide their presence, he replied, to create the ultimate prank. And that was how a whole range of new stealth seals were created. Naruto missed Hashirama, Tobirama, Izuna and Madara like it was nobody's business. He wished he could go to them, talk with them and train with them, but it was never that simple. He knew he would just have to be patient, and that had never been his strong point. Naruto was with the Uzumaki for exactly 8 months before they were reminded that outside their compound, clans were still at war with each other. It wasn't that Naruto had forgotten. It was more like the Uzumaki didn't appear to take as much of an active role. Not as much as the Uchiha and the Senju had. Honorable One, there is a breach in the barrier to the east. We estimate 3 of a higher class. Naruto looked up from the seal he and the head of the clan were studying. He sighed and looked away. He really hated these petty fights. Well then, they shall have to be dealt with, reminded why it's foolish to mess with the Uzumaki. Perhaps, brother Naruto can go with 2 others. We have yet to see him in battle. It is still undetermined which fighting style he uses. The clan head mused. As you order, Honorable One. Naruto replied with a bow. The Uzumaki were pretty strict on respect, and you wouldn't get it if you didn't deserve it, but you sure as hell better give it. Naruto stood at the gates of the compound, waiting for his assigned teammates. He had walked there slowly, deep in his own thoughts. Would he have to kill those that had intruded? It would not be the first time he killed, but he still did not want to. However, he Madara, Izuna, Tobirama and Hashirama, and decided it was time to start making a name for themselves. After all, the first half of their plan was to get strong enough to protect their village, which meant stronger than everyone else. Already he'd heard the talk among the Uzumaki, of Hashirama and Madara's feats in battle. He heard about their clashes, when the Senju and the Uchiha were at it again, choosing to keep fighting each other rather than kill the other's clansmen, and the clashes were already becoming well known. It was only Naruto who had yet to make a name for himself. Hell, he'd even heard small snippet of Tobirama and Izuna's accomplishments, but always overshadowed by their brothers. That wouldn't last long. They were powerful in their own right. Naruto closed his eyes before making a decision. He would let the shinobi know about the blonde-haired Uzumaki named Naruto. And that meant not killing them. Let's go Gaki. Honorable One said that you're in charge of this mission. A new voice chuckled from next to him. Naruto's eyes snapped open, surprised at the sudden promotion, and he grinned wildly. Sure. I hope you two can keep up. Then they were out the compound gates and racing across the grassy plains that dominated the east side. Naruto didn't slow down when he sensed the three shinobi slinking their way through the grass, gradually making their way towards the Uzumaki compound. Instead, he fluctuated his chakra to let them know he was coming. He saw them, rising from the long grass to see who had come. They were nobodies, no clan markings at least. They could have come from anywhere, and that was probably the point. Naruto grinned before flashing right past the first one and going for the second, confusing them. He leapt into the air before delivering a devastating kick to the ninja's head. While the ninja was still airborne, Naruto slammed his elbow into their chest, causing them to crash straight back to the ground. That one would not be moving just yet. Naruto doubled back for the first one, the exchange between him and the ninja having lasted no longer than 2 seconds. He had wanted to emulate his father, as Konoha's yellow flash, and as such he'd increased his speed to match as much as he'd been able in the short time that had passed. He knew he still had a ways to go, but it was a start. Taijutsu rule number 1, never let the enemy get behind you. Naruto declared before performing that nightmare-inducing jutsu Kakashi had performed on him. 1,000 years of death no jutsu. The horrified scream was enough to petrify the third shinobi in his tracks. Naruto approached him with a large smile on his face, but it was a sigh kind of smile. So what was it you guys were after, eh? He asked the ninja politely. The Seal F formula for the barrier that surrounds the C compound. Oh, why don't you just make your own? It's really not all that hard. Stealing isn't very nice, you know. Naruto lectured as though speaking to a small child, and the two Uzumaki with him were snickering under their breath, each one watching over a ninja. So fast. The enemy ninja replied helplessly, and Naruto was forced to conclude that he was a little shell-shocked. Duh. Naruto chided, flicking the ninja's forehead. What do you want me to do? Stand still so you can hit me? No thanks. You should leave now, take your friends with you, and really, you shouldn't come back. Naruto continued to lecture while the ninja's two teammates were tossed back at him. Naruto knew that this single encounter would not be enough to garner much of a reputation, but more like it, and he would build one quickly. He grinned at the thought while watching the enemy ninja hightail it out of there with an awkward waddle as he had to carry his teammates with him. You know, I was actually starting to like that guy. Naruto mock sniffed, wiping a fake tear from his eye. Yeah, and I didn't get to see any of your fighting style. His teammate sniffed dramatically as well. If you're that bugged by it, all you had to do was ask. Naruto laughed. But seriously kid, just how good are you? I dunno, but awesome is definitely in there somewhere. Naruto grinned, starting the trip back to the compound. What's awesome? Naruto felt a Hashirama-like depression coming on. He sometimes forgot that diction from his time, and this time were slightly different. Awesome is inspiring an overwhelming feeling of reverence, admiration, or fear, causing or inducing awe. Naruto quoted in a toneless voice. Man, explaining a joke just took the funny right out of it. Like me. Naruto added, just to make himself feel better. They were nearing the compound again, having not been all that far from it in the first place. Awesome? Sounds good. Uzumaki are awesome, awe-inspiring. Okay, now you're just overdoing it. Naruto informed them seriously. Nonetheless, from that day onwards, everything to the Uzumaki was awesome. Naruto-kun, said Shinobi was standing on top of a pillar of rock he just learned how to create, yelling out his victory with numerous yada-s. Upon hearing his name, the 17-year-old looked down with the classic expression to see Mito running towards him with the biggest grin she could manage. Guess what, Blondie? We're going to see Hashi-kun and Tobi-kun. We leave in 3 days. Mito yelled up to him in excitement. Do you have to call me Blondie? Naruto yelled back with a pout. Yes, now get down and pack. My father is coming with, and I still have to give you that lesson in clan etiquette. Mito laughed evilly, and Naruto had the feeling that this was going to be painful. Why he had to pack so soon made absolutely no sense to him whatsoever, but he'd learned to listen to the red-haired Uzumaki a long time ago. She was worse than he was when she didn't get what she wanted. She put him to shame when it came to pranks, and worse yet, Naruto still didn't know enough about this world to retaliate. Being an Uzumaki meant that clan rules were something that just didn't come naturally to him. He couldn't sit still for hours on end if it had nothing to do with senjutsu. He couldn't keep his mouth shut if he felt something had to be said. He couldn't stare at the ground all the time. He sometimes didn't take his shoes off just so. 'Cause some people were really fussy about that. Sometimes the only way to eat something was by trying to shovel as much of it into one's mouth as possible. The list was endless, and so were the problems that came with it. Naruto sighed and focused his chakra, sending the pillar of earth back into the ground. Hopping off and landing next to Mito, who immediately wrinkled her nose and stated, "Better yet, go take a bath." Naruto scowled at her, but she had a point. It was a particularly hot day and he'd been working on this jutsu without the use of his clones the whole day. His clones were busy with cooking and seals and Uzumaki politics, which for some reason the clan head seemed to think he needed to learn, and Uzumaki customs, and the list also went on and on some more. So he decided to learn this relatively simple jutsu himself. Humming, Naruto walked to the river that ran near the compound. It was larger than any river he'd ever seen before and was just as wild as any Uzumaki, making swimming across it a really bad idea. It was great for chakra control, though, which the Uzumaki needed plenty of when it came to the more delicate seals. Naruto had started creating and perfecting his wind-style techniques in the year he'd been here, with the Uzumaki. Before he'd come to the Uzumaki, he'd learnt some earth-style techniques and one or two water-style from Hashirama and Tobirama. From Madara and Izuna, he'd confirmed the fact that he had no talent for fire-style whatsoever. Since coming to the Uzumaki, he'd focused more on those two areas. He'd found that he couldn't, no matter how hard he tried, do anything related to fire style or lightning style, unless he placed it in a seal. Madara had pouted about that. He'd been pretty pissed that he couldn't teach Naruto anything and outdo Hashirama in some way. Those two were weird that way, a rivalry much like Naruto's and Sasuke's, very prominent in their relationship. Still, Naruto had been neglecting his water style and he really shouldn't. Guess he'd just have to add more stuff to his training. Naruto, ignoring the rapid currents, dived straight into the water. Using his chakra to keep him where he was and not rushing down the stream, Naruto closed his eyes and focused on the clones he had around the village, sending the warning signal that he was going to dispel them. That was their signal to say goodbye to whoever was teaching him or to place a bookmark in whatever they were studying. Then the knowledge of the day was recalled and his mind was assaulted with images, sounds and smells that he'd never seen or heard before. Sometimes he wondered if sending clones was truly the same as doing it himself, but he didn't have the time to do everything that he was doing right now. He was 17 years behind on all of that stuff, with so much to work towards. He couldn't afford to waste time just to experience something that would probably be no different than if a clone did it. Naruto bowed stiffly to the Senju gate guards while they sent a messenger on ahead to inform Batsuma that they had arrived. Stretching out his senses, Naruto already knew that Hashirama was not in the compound. Stretching out a little further, he found the other shinobi in the surrounding forest, working on his wood style. Just because he knew how it worked, didn't mean it was any easier to accomplish. So far, he was still trying to figure out just how much of each style he needed to make the most effective combination for the wood style. Naruto didn't envy him there and often wondered what kind of bloodline limit he'd have if he actually worked at creating one. He supposed it would be chakra-based seeing as he had so much of it, but one never could tell unless they tried. Naruto went through the motions that Mito had drilled into him before coming here, mentally absent from the room as he'd found this was the best way to deal with all these annoying clan customs. But that idea was short-lived since Batsuma wanted to talk. "So, I see you're fitting in nicely, Naruto-san. It's always good to have strong allies, wouldn't you say?" Hi. But I believe that I should be strong enough to kick everyone's butt, rather than rely on others all the time. It just seems like a waste, to have to be so dependent and then everything falls to hell when your allies can't help you out or if they turn on you. I saw that once. It didn't end well. Naruto replied, completely abandoning the formal way of speaking. Now family, that's different. An alliance is not permanent, and as fickle as it is easily broken. But family, that's forever. The Senju and the Uzumaki are family and I hope that we shall always come to the other's aid, should it be needed. He's an odd one. Batsuma agreed, looking to the Uzumaki clan head. His gaze was stern, calculating, as though measuring Naruto up. But he has a good head on his shoulders. Knows not to trust too completely just because of a signed piece of paper. Naruto didn't reply. He hadn't been asked to and the darned formalities dictated that he kept his mouth shut. But he was happier when he sensed Hashirama's chakra returning to the compound. Good. Now he didn't have to suffer alone. Pardon my interruption, but may I leave for a moment? I wish to greet Hashirama-san upon his return. Naruto asked, inspiration hitting him. You may. You weren't exaggerating his sensing capabilities, Uzumaki-sama. Perhaps he could teach my sons a few things. Batsuma replied, half of his attention given to Naruto and the other half given to the Uzumaki clan head. Naruto didn't stay to hear the reply. He hurried out of the stifling meeting, not missing the snickers from both the Senju and the Uzumaki guards. That's what you get for being important, brat. One of the Uzumaki, the same one that had gone with him the other day to handle the infiltration, said mockingly. I'm not important. I'm just some kid who got lost and had a Senju bring him home. Naruto replied in confusion. You gotta be joking. I knew you were a naive kid, but this takes the cake. I guess you can't help it. You still have a lot to catch up on. Naruto didn't dwell in the confusing conversation, rushing instead to see Hashirama. Man, he missed that guy. Too bad they couldn't see the Uchiha as well. It took every ounce of willpower he had not to pounce on the Senju the moment he saw him, and to wait at the gate. Truthfully, Hashirama looked tired. Must have been training hard. You're late, Naruto stated cheerfully, surprising the Senju. Yeah, I was getting close to a breakthrough. Besides, I needed to work off some steam. Tobirama was sent on a mission. Naruto understood immediately and his sympathies went out to the Senju. Unlike Madara and Hashirama, Naruto had nothing in this world. His only connection to it was the 4 ninja that were destined to become enemies. Not that Naruto had told them that. He supposed his connection was something more like his goal to change everything for the better. He'll come home. You've trained him well. I'm starting to hear about his gallant exploits. Naruto supplied with a grin. Yeah, he's strong, but someone will always be stronger. Hashirama replied with a soft pointed smile at Naruto. Anyways, I hear you guys are here on important business. We are? I thought it was a regular, keeping up appearances kind of visit? Naruto replied with a frown. Oh Naruto. Sometimes I worry about you. Hashirama laughed, eyes scrunching closed and head rolling back. You're here because the Uzumaki clan head has come to officially introduce his next of kin and because Mito-chan and I will be married in a few months. Hashirama informed him when his laughter had died down to chuckles. What? Really? That's so cool. I wonder who he picked. Naruto grinned, following the Senju as he walked further into the compound and towards his room. Naruto? Just what have you been learning these past couple months? Hashirama asked with a worried smile. Because the clan head doesn't take on students unless they have intentions to make them important. My father sure as hell doesn't teach. You mean? Quote. Naruto blinked at him, eyes going wide. You're going to be the next clan head of the Uzumaki, baka. Hashirama clarified. No way. Naruto whispered, eyes glazing over in shock. What the heck, Naruto? This was what we were working towards. Hashirama was starting to get seriously worried. Now it's all official. I just never thought it would happen so soon. Naruto yelled out with a grin before pulling Hashirama into a hug. I mean, I've always had big dreams, but this is the first time I've ever accomplished anything I've ever set out to do. Naruto let the Senju go with a laugh. I mean, this is just so wow. Haha. Hashirama chuckled weakly, trying to keep up with the blonde shinobi's exuberance. Congratulations. Thanks. Oh man, Hashirama, this is so cool. Dappbayo. Konoha will be here before we know it. Naruto sighed, lapsing into a nostalgic contentment. But it didn't last long. Hang on. Why the hell didn't Mito-chan tell me all of this? Hashirama couldn't help but laugh. He really had missed his blonde friend. He always had a way of making them feel better no matter what the circumstances were. Both of them found themselves missing the Uchiha more than ever, but they could only ever see each other in battle at this point. So how close are you to completing your wood style? Naruto asked, hoping to lift the mood a little. At the moment there's too much earth chakra in the mix with the wood coming out too brittle and not at all flexible. If I add more water, then it tends to be very flexible but it doesn't really bind, like it's too floppy. Here I'll show you. Hashirama paused on his way to his room so that he could clasp his hands together. His chakra flared and a single wooden pillar rose from the ground. Naruto studied it as it moved, mentally comparing it to the wooden pillars Yamato Taiko used. This one cracked and splintered almost immediately, making the Uzumaki wince at the noise. The pillar collapsed to the ground with the Senju muttering it was good for firewood, but that was all. Another flare of chakra and another pillar rose up to the sky, only this time it drooped over on itself, flopping this way and that, hardly having enough strength to keep growing upwards. The wood itself seemed to be almost weeping. Hang on. Let me try sensing out the chakra you're using. Maybe I can tell you then. Naruto suggested, placing a hand on Hashirama's back and closing his eyes in concentration. Hi. Hashirama grinned before repeating the task once again. You're using too much either way, that much is obvious, but you're also trying to shove both chakra through both your hands at the same time. Didn't I tell you that it would be easier if you channeled the different chakra in each hand? I bet it would even be easier to control that way. My bad? Hashirama offered with a sheepish smile. Naruto lowered his hand and Hashirama turned to face the blonde who shrugged. Meh, you'd have figured it out on your own either way. Ha ha ha, yeah I guess so. Come on, I want to change these clothes and all this dawdling isn't helping. Hashirama agreed, continuing the walk. The two walked through the compound, talking easily, laughing and joking in a way that only the greatest of friends could. The Senju that saw them smiled, knowing that this was good for the alliance but never guessing that the two really did know each other that well. So how's Tobirama's training going? Naruto asked as Hashirama opened the door to his room. The Senju inclined his head thoughtfully. Well, we don't have as much time to train anymore, but he's amazing, Naruto. If I'm not careful he just might surpass me. Hashirama paused to tilt his head in consideration before asking curiously, what's it like with the Uzumaki? Naruto blinked at him before stopping in their casual walk and smiling warmly, tilting his face up to the clouds. Truthfully, I haven't felt more at home in my entire life. They make being me very easy. What do you mean by that? Hashirama asked, stopping as well, curious as to what the blonde meant. Well, all my life people have told me I'm loud and obnoxious and that I never think before I leap. But with the Uzumaki, they're loud too and they're just as crazy in their ideas. They leap before even thinking about leaping and they like the things I do and understand the amazingness behind those things, like bright colors, clashing colors and ramen. They teach without needing a reason to, sharing knowledge just to make sure that the next generation is as powerful as they are and even more so. They celebrate the ideals of family and friendship, cherishing every bond they have. They're not afraid to open their mouths and just say what's on their mind. Never before have I met so many people that understand my ways. Naruto explained. I understand them too. Their family, Hashirama, and that feels great. I find myself feeling more and more sorry for their loss in my time. They truly are an amazing clan. That they are. I love their festivals. I think there's one coming up soon. Hashirama replied, a small smile tilting his lips as well. You bet there is. It's the festival of the kami. All of them, even the Shinigami. We're going to be celebrating all that they have given us in this world. They have this shrine with these masks in them. They look so cool. But they're powerful. They have seals in them that, as far as I can tell, do unimaginably amazing things. But like all things powerful in the ninja world, they come at a price. As such, the masks are not to be used lightly, if at all. Naruto explained, growing excited at the idea of the coming festival. Wow, the Uzumaki aren't too concerned with flaunting their power, are they? Hashirama mused. Not really. Like I said, they like family and friendship more than power, like the Senju and the Uchiha. You know, that's why I think the clans are such rivals, the Uchiha and the Senju I mean. They're both fighting to protect the ones they love. Naruto grinned at the idea. At least that's the way he liked to see things. Well then we'd better hurry up and get stronger so that we can stop this ridiculous fighting. I'd estimate that we're only at Jonin level, basing it on your descriptions of the Konoha ranking system. Not bad, for a Gaki. I'm still stronger than you. Naruto reminded with a mischievous grin, poking the Senju in the ribs. Hey, I can't help it, you're older than me. Just you wait, Uzumaki. Once I get this wood style down and the Senjutsu mastered, you're so dead. Hashirama promised with a determined growl. "Oh yeah? Won't mean shit if you can't catch me," Naruto taunted, before ruffling the 15-year-old's hair and dashing away from the punch. Naruto, out of the 5 of them, was definitely the fastest, Tobirama coming a close second, and due to his mastery of Senjutsu, the strongest. His ability to spam the shadow clones more than the others also put him in the lead when it came to learning things. But those 4 were no picnic either. They had a lot more chakra than the other kids from Naruto's time, even more than most Chunin when Naruto had first begun to train with them, and at the time they were still considered to be at the level of mere children. The shinobi of this era were on a whole other level. Naruto couldn't help but wonder just what had happened. Perhaps peace had clouded their minds. If they managed to create the ultimate peace, would that make ninja obsolete? Naruto dismissed the thought in favor of looking out for the ninja that was now trying to land at least one blow on him. "Come on Hashirama. You're going to have to be faster if you ever want to touch a hair on this awesome head," Naruto taunted as he ducked out of the way. Hashirama's taijutsu was amazing. Naruto concluded that when you didn't really have all that much time to learn ninjutsu due to the constant fighting, you were forced to rely on taijutsu more often than not. Which was why all 4 of them, Uchiha and Senju alike, could hand him his ass in taijutsu unless he was using the frog kumite, which wasn't as effective without the senjutsu, but it was still pretty good. Naruto grinned as he backed away from a kick that was aimed for his head, the blow ultimately creating a small crater in the ground and alerting the Senju around them to the fight. "Missed me, again," Naruto yelled happily while ducking under a punch. Naruto sensed both the clan heads exiting the building they had been heading towards and wondered if he should stop the fight, but he was having too much fun. Only Hashirama and Madara would really go all out like this on him. They all loved it, pushing themselves to new heights while having fun at the same time, comfortable in the knowledge that they weren't about to die anytime soon either. Tobirama and Izuna had still been slightly hesitant the last time they had sparred. Naruto couldn't understand why though, but he shrugged it off. "Uzumaki Naruto, when I get my hands on you." Hashirama fumed. "Ha, you're too slow for that," Naruto interrupted. Hashirama smirked before jumping backwards suddenly and clasping his hands together in an all-too-familiar seal for the blonde. 3 shadow clones rushed at him. "Really, increasing the number doesn't make you faster," Naruto chided as he ducked and dodged, not once going on the offensive. Naruto had learnt to be pretty flexible when fighting with Hashirama. One had to be in order to dodge some of his blows. 2 of the clones slammed their palms to the ground, using earth style to raise pillars of earth that Naruto sprang backwards from, now having to find his way around buildings as well. Naruto sensed the 3rd clone moving in behind him and struck out for the first time, dispelling the clone. The smoke from the clone and the add-zing of chakra in the air after it dispelled was enough to confuse Naruto's sensing abilities just long enough for the original Hashirama to use wood style to bind him, wood wrapping around his wrists and ankles, suspending him in the air like a plaything. He scowled at the Senju as he approached. He got a laugh for his troubles. "I don't have to be faster than you, Naruto-kun. I just have to be smarter." He then flicked Naruto's forehead. "Ayo," Naruto whined. "Ha ha ha, Naruto-kun, I think it's safe to say you just got owned." Mito laughed from where she and her father were watching. "Oh yeah?" Naruto laughed before popping into a cloud of smoke. A blur of blonde and black burst from the ground, striking out at Hashirama. "Hey, I was wondering how long it would take you to get out of there." Hashirama yelled as he sprang to the rooftops. "Now fight me seriously, no more clones." "A light, but define serious?" Naruto laughed. "No ninjutsu, or genjutsu, or senjutsu, or fuinjutsu. Straight up taijutsu and kenjutsu," Hashirama elaborated before drawing his sword. "Ah shit. Naruto was still learning kenjutsu." "Mito-kun, can I borrow your sword?" Naruto yelled down to the red-haired Uzumaki, who laughed and shook her head. "Well damn." Naruto pulled out a kunai to block the blows, grumbling how this was damaging the weapon. It didn't exactly help that more and more Senju were popping out from the compound, drawn towards the sound of the fighting. They were watching the 2 clan heirs, whispering in excitement to themselves as they made their own assessment of the mock fight. "Naruto," Hashirama stated quietly, too quietly for anyone else to hear, when they were standing close enough. "This is fun and all, but much more of this and it'll get serious enough to reveal just how much of our skills we've been hiding." "Is that such a bad thing?" Naruto countered, raising his kunai to block the quick slash from Hashirama's blade. "For now, yes. At the moment, I have managed to create the perfect balance between training, missions and family. I don't want to disrupt this balance by allowing my father to see that I can handle more than what he sends me on. Hashirama concluded. Also, the Uzumaki are not blinded to the warring state and they too offer their services to those who would have them. You've just been kept away from it for the time being so that you could catch up in your learning. After this little get-together, I imagine that I'll be seeing you on the battlefields a lot more. I see. Well then, I say we tell them we're at a stalemate, that neither of us will win this. Naruto replied thoughtfully. Seemed he was going to get his chance to get that reputation after all. They nodded to show the timing in order to break away and flip back towards the ground. At this rate, neither of us would have won anyway. Naruto added in a louder tone, studying his now useless kunai with a pout. What were you trying to do, cleave the thing? He added with a snort. Even his wrist was feeling the power of those blows. Naruto, your kenjutsu sucks. Mito scolded and the blonde sighed. There was just no pleasing that girl. But his performance leads me to conclude that he may just be ready for something else. The Uzumaki clan head mused. I was fighting with a kunai. What do you want from me? Naruto yelled back before sticking out his tongue. Mito crossed her arms with a huff and looked away while Hashirama chuckled. Hey, that reminds me, there's someone I want you to meet. Naruto grinned widely at the Senju before hopping down off the roof they'd been fighting on. Hashirama quirked a brow in interest before following him. Naruto led them to where meeting hall where the Senju guards and the Uzumaki guards were chatting quietly amongst themselves. Hashirama, this is Uzumaki Takashi. Naruto gestured to one of the Uzumaki guards and smiled broadly. He and I often go on missions together. Hashirama blinked in surprise for a moment before realization dawned on him. Naruto was telling him that he'd made a friend. In this world where he was a stranger, even though he'd found a place he could call home surrounded by those that were family, it wasn't the same. A friend was still something different, something Naruto always cherished. Takashi was Naruto's first Uzumaki friend. Takashi was also surprised at the introduction and turned to the Uzumaki sitting next to him. He was watching Naruto and the Senju boy, Hashirama, walk away, talking together as they went. You felt that too, right? Takashi asked and the other nodded. There is much of young Naruto-kun's past that we do not know. Much of it we will never learn. We can only guess. Takashi sighed. What do you mean? I thought you guys were all about openness and unity? One of the Senju asked, tone polite even though the question showed his confusion. Well, we speculate that Naruto-kun lost his parents long before he came to us. That he was far too young to have been taught anything about being an Uzumaki and was left to fend for himself for many years. He hides it well, but there are signs, small slip-ups that show us he has a painful past, one that hides many things both powerful and dangerous. Young Naruto-kun hides much of his power and we wait for the day he will feel comfortable enough to show it to us freely. Hashirama-san is much the same way. He hides more than what he allows his clan to see, but his reasons are acceptable. He doesn't not wish to be sent away from the clan, his family, for longer periods of time, and receiving higher-ranked missions will do this. Naruto-kun on the other hand is different. He was unfamiliar with the prospect of receiving without giving anything in return. At first he was startled and tensed at every gesture, every casual greeting, eyes showing a world of doubt and hesitant glee. Takashi paused to frown. It was as though he hadn't known much kindness in his life. Had his parents been alive for most of his life as he likes to give the impression of, then he would not be so surprised by the Uzumaki way of life. And you trust him as your clan head? The Senju asked in surprise. Look at him. Takashi smiled. Everything about him is honest. He cannot lie, not even if he tried. Watch him with Hashirama-san. They were friends long before he came here. It's even in their chakra. There is a strong bond between the two. While Naruto-kun may have a past that is beyond many of our understanding, he has the one thing we all value most. He has the heart of an Uzumaki and will always, without fail, place those around him before himself. The other Uzumaki guard explained. His past is his own, and we will not press the issue. It is for him to come to peace with and for him to realize that we will not abandon him as his eyes often show fear of. I don't think he even realizes that he shows it so easily. Takashi muttered. The Senju blinked in amazement. While they might have had a strong bond with the Uzumaki, they felt they would never understand the clan. They were in a league all their own. While the Senju would not stand for secrets, fearing that it might harm the clan, the Uzumaki let them remain as they were. Such was the saying, they let sleeping dogs lie. With a clan such as theirs, with their sensing ability, they knew how rare a secret could be and did not pry when one arose. They knew all too well what that small piece of individuality would mean and left well enough alone. Chapter 7. End. Chapter 8. Start. Izuna watched the oblivious ninja in front of them carefully, body tense as he waited. Madara stood next to him, lips thinned into a tight line. "There's nothing we can do," Madara finally decided, his tone nothing more than a breathy whisper so that only Izuna could hear the word. Yet his eyes closed as he said so, voice sounding strained. "Let's get this over with." Hi. Izuna replied, pulling out a kunai before grasping Madara's shoulder once and rushing towards their enemy. The 4 Senju hired to protect the precious item which the Uchiha had been hired to steal were not Hashirama and Tobirama. But they were Senju all the same, and the Uchiha that had been told to go with Madara and Izuna would not let them live. The most Madara and Izuna could do was allow them a swift death, a painless death, and one that would ensure a body was left behind to be buried. Madara felt the already daunting weight on his shoulders increase that much more upon his shoulders as he followed his younger brother, ignoring the approving grunts from the Uchiha behind them. "Naruto-kun, walk with me," said Blonde. Looked up from the scroll he'd been reading and blinked at the clan head before he nodded and got to his feet. "Your fighting style, Naruto-kun, while unique and effective, is far from that of the Uzumaki style. Up till now you have been learning jutsu, and you're very good with ninjutsu as are most Uzumaki, and you've been learning sealing, something any true Uzumaki knows. You've also been learning the history and customs of your clan. But I believe that now, you are ready to learn something a little different, something you'll need to dispel all your clones to achieve." Naruto nodded in understanding before pausing in the walk to focus on his clones. He sent the warning before dispelling them, taking a moment more to absorb all the memories. The walk with the clan head was silent after that. The older Uzumaki seemed to be deep in thought, contemplative mostly, and Naruto did not feel inclined to interrupt his musings. Naruto was led to the other side of the compound, a side that was actually neighbored by some cliffs. He'd never really focused much on this part of the compound. It wasn't where anything happened, as it was mostly in an isolated part of the compound with buildings facing away from the others and whatnot. Apparently. He must have missed something. He blinked in fascination as the clan head performed a series of seals. Despite what other ninjas thought, the sealing art was not performed with brushes and ink. Fuinjutsu also relied on hand signs and sometimes on brushes, paper and ink. It was by watching the sequence of hand signs that Naruto was able to deduce that the seals unlocked something as far as he could gather. With the sequence completed, the clan head pressed a palm to what had previously been a blank wall of rock. It began as a circle of ancient script that quickly spread out into lines, stretching across a massive portion of the rock's surface. Naruto waited with a racing heart and wide eyes as a door began to appear, seeming to be carved from the very rock itself. With the sounds of grating stone on stone, the slab of rock moved to the side to reveal a space within the very cliff face itself, a room that was vaster than what Naruto could actually see. But from what he could see, the space was completely empty. "This will be the last stage of your training, Naruto-kun," the clan head began gravely. "After this, there is nothing else to teach you about being an Uzumaki. If you master this, then you have done, in the space of a few months, what only a handful of Uzumaki had managed to achieve in their entire lifetime. But there's still so much that I have to learn," Naruto protested weakly. The mastering of more jutsu from an element you've already grasped enough understanding of to begin creating your own techniques. What more could you need to learn there other than an hour or so it would take to master yet another jutsu? Or a new type of storage seal? Naruto-kun, you know the very basics of sealing, so much so that you can create them yourself. Anything more that you learn now, it'll all be adding to a perfect mastery of the Uzumaki way. You must remember, Naruto-kun, that one will never stop learning, never stop improving, that is the way of life. But there will come a time where one must start teaching. Naruto, you've mastered 3 elements, wind, water and earth. You've got yang chakra in spades. Still not sure what you're going to do with that, but you've got it. You're brilliant at sealing, picking it up faster than what anyone else ever has. It's like it just clicks for you or something. Naruto turned to see that Takashi was approaching them, smiling broadly. "Thank you for coming." The clan head smiled pleasantly at the red-haired Uzumaki who bowed in respect. "As you requested, Honorable One," Takashi replied before turning back to Naruto. "You've got more heart than all the Uzumaki combined, and we're still not sure how that's possible, but it is. You've got this, without a doubt. ... But I will admit, you still need to work on your kenjutsu." Takashi added with a cheeky grin and a wink. "Thanks, Takashi-kun." Naruto looked down, cheeks reddening. Looking up with the familiar determination burning in his gaze, he grinned and asked, "So, what next? When you go into that room, you'll have to make it to the other side, where you'll need to deactivate the seals that power the room. The room itself in an obstacle course, designed to hone one's reflexes and speed, strengthen one's stamina, increase one's overall physique and test one's ceiling. But mostly it's about training one's body to perform the Uzumaki taijutsu perfectly on an instinctual level," the clan head stated. "It will scan your chakra as you pass the doorway and start at the difficulty level the seals have assessed you to be at. The entire system is designed to scan your performance and adjust it to fit your mistakes, working on correcting them. It doesn't have a pattern. It's completely unpredictable, so don't waste time trying," the clan head explained, and Naruto listened intently. "You'll be locked in until you disable the system, and that's where I come in. See, it's dangerous going in there because not everyone comes out. You could very well run out of chakra, even as an Uzumaki. I'll be on the outside sending in food, so don't worry about starving." Naruto wasn't concerned about that. He was far more concerned with what he'd do for a bathroom. "Are there any periods where I'll be able to rest?" he asked instead. "Briefly. It isn't designed to really try to kill a person. It's just sometimes it cannot be completed. The one attempting it simply overstepped their limits and couldn't overcome them," Takashi admitted with a frown. "There is an override seal on this side, and there are seals set to monitor you, so I'll know if I need to pull you out." Naruto felt disappointment at that, not sure if he wanted to be pulled out because he didn't like giving up, and that felt an awful lot like giving up. But he was also relieved that there was a way out if he did need it. "Hi, I understand." Naruto gave a short bow, turning to the door. "What's the record on this course?" "Naruto, I don't want you to push yourself to break a record. That wouldn't help you," the clan head warned. "I'll be fine," Naruto replied adamantly. "I'm just trying to get an idea of what I'm up against." 2 months. That's the fastest it's ever been completed. But as the course is designed to target your mistakes and weaknesses, you'll have to be careful, Naruto-kun," Takashi stressed. "Always." Naruto grinned with a thumbs up, and the other two relaxed. Naruto giving a thumbs up was perhaps the best reassurance he could give. The blonde gave one last grin, yelled a cheerful, "Say bye to Mito-chan for me," before rushing through the doors. The last thing the other two Uzumaki saw as the doors closed was a familiar hand sign with an even more familiar shout of, "Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu." "Why didn't you tell him that it was your record?" the clan head asked curiously, turning to Takashi. "Because it wasn't needed. He will focus his attention on beating me, rather than on learning to correct his mistakes." Takashi shrugged. "And that would defeat the whole purpose of the exercise. Still, I wonder how he'll do." Naruto had walked into the room, determined to prove that he had what it took to be an Uzumaki, and had walked out 6 weeks later, grinning wildly just before collapsing from exhaustion. Otherwise, the knucklehead had been perfectly fine. Takashi had carried the blonde all the way to the clan head with a soft smile on his features, infinitely proud of the young teen. He didn't even mind that he was supposed to have been the next clan head, had Naruto not come along, because he realized that Naruto made a much better leader. Better than what any of them could have ever hoped to be. After that, Naruto was officially announced as the clan heir to the Uzumaki, and he was taken to complete his final stage of initiation, something the stunned blonde hadn't even known that he'd have to do. This time it was Takashi that led him to yet another somewhat isolated part of the compound, and Naruto was surprised to learn that the Uzumaki had their own blacksmith. "This, Naruto-kun, is where you'll receive your very own set of armor. Uzumaki armor is special, in that it's made with a special type of metal, and it's forged with seals built right into its core. It's lighter than other armor and it's more flexible without losing durability," Takashi explained as the blacksmith looked up. "Ah, well, I'll be the clan heir." The blacksmith grinned, giving Naruto a short bow. "I'd begun to wonder when I'd be seeing you. So, what color will it be?" Naruto blinked in surprise before a slow grin spread on his features. Orange, of course. Naruto screeched in surprise when metal chains shot from the blacksmith and wrapped around him, glowing brightly with chakra and filling the room with their intensity. Naruto felt the chakra more than just physically as Kurama's chakra recoiled from the chains, churning painfully just below the surface but otherwise keeping at bay. The chains shifted, moved, to form something different, and Naruto was half surprised when they didn't even burn his skin as they shaped and conformed to fit his body perfectly. To his further amazement, the pieces of what Naruto could now identify as armor moved away from him in the individual pieces that it was made up of, still glowing brightly, and moved to rest on a large workbench. Naruto openly gaped at the now dulling pieces of metal, a slight stream of drool running down his chin. "Oh man, I gotta learn how to do that," Naruto whispered. "It's a bloodline that not many Uzumaki possess," Takashi explained. "And it's a bloodline your mother possessed. Half the reason she was chosen to be a Jinchuriki like you," Kurama informed him from within his mind. He'd long since learnt the truth of the night the Kyuubi was sealing within him because Kurama had told him about it. It was a tragic tale, but he was proud of his parents and everything they had done for him. It made him that much sadder that they'd even had to make such terrible sacrifices in the first place. "So do I have it?" Naruto whispered in reply. "That is not something I can tell you." Kurama's reply was faded, meaning he had had enough of the conversation and wasn't about to reply again. He spoke to Naruto occasionally outside of when Naruto was sleeping, but that didn't mean he was any less grouchy. "How would one know if they have this ability?" Naruto asked with a slight thoughtful frown. "Really, Naruto-kun? You're so frickin' out there already and now you want a bloodline as well," Takashi teased, not meaning anything negative by it. "Doesn't hurt to be well-rounded," Naruto replied with a grin. "Well, let's see." The blacksmith mused with a warm smile. "I'm the only one who has the bloodline at the moment, and it's rather tedious doing everything by myself. If Naruto-kun here can apprentice himself to me, even just as a substitute for when things get really tough, it'll help me and the clan out greatly. Well, then I shall speak to our honorable one. You should test him in the meantime, now's as good a time as any. That way we'll know for sure when we bring the matter up later or if we should even bring it up at all." Takashi shrugged. "Yay. What do I have to do?" Naruto asked breathlessly, eyes shining with excitement. "Hold this," the blacksmith replied, after moving away from them and towards a drawer, returning with a flat piece of silver metal. Naruto lifted the rectangle of metal from the blacksmith's hand very carefully, not entirely sure what he was supposed to be looking for. "Flat in your palm," the blacksmith continued to instruct, and Naruto obeyed. The metal was warm, even when he'd taken it from the blacksmith, too warm for the small amount of contact it had had with his hand. It also gleamed a pale blue whenever the light caught it, and Naruto was fascinated by that. "Alright, now channel chakra over it. Not a lot, just enough to cover it." Naruto nodded to show that he had heard before complying with the instruction. Carefully trying to not overdo it, he sent as little chakra as he could manage to the rectangle in his palm. Waiting, still not sure what he was looking for, Naruto watched the little rectangle carefully. He maintained the chakra contact while he watched, sure there was a goofy smile on his face. As the seconds ticked by and still nothing happened, Naruto's smile began to fade. Maybe he didn't have a bloodline after all. It was supposed to be really rare, and what were the odds that he, one of the last Uzumaki from his time, would have something like that? "I'm afraid it would appear that you do not possess the bloodline, Naruto-kun. I'm sorry," Takashi stated quietly, regretfully. "Wait, just for a moment more," Kurama murmured distractedly in his mind. And Naruto did, blinking in bewilderment at the rectangle of flat bluish silver metal. "It's warm," he stated without really thinking. And it was only growing warmer. The reaction was instant, spontaneous and explosive. All things that Naruto prided his own personality as being particularly like at the best of times. What had begun as a thin rectangle of strangely warm metal, rippled once before denting inwards, conforming to the shape of his hand. It didn't stop there. The chakra he'd fed to the metal caused it to grow, move like a liquid over and around his hand until it covered every inch of skin below his elbow. "That's so awesome," Naruto declared while Takashi and the blacksmith gaped in surprise. "But how do I get it off now? I guess his training should begin immediately," Takashi stated, looking a little stunned. Naruto grinned at him while the Kyuubi chuckled in the depths of Naruto's mind. You know, Naruto, that man, the blacksmith, he just might be related to you through your mother's side. And if that didn't make Naruto a little more respectful of the man that was now his teacher, he didn't know what else would. So, he possesses the Uzumaki bloodline. That is troubling just as it is elating. The clan head mused. I thought the wandering fraction did not possess the bloodline, as that is one of the rules. Perhaps his mother had the ability, but only as a carrier. Takashi suggested. They were both watching Naruto, whose first task as a blacksmith in training was to remove the metal from his arm and return it to its original form. Not an easy task as the boy essentially had no idea how to use his bloodline. The metal was designed to react to the possibility of a bloodline with no conscious effort of the tester's part, so Naruto was going to be there a while. For the time being, the metal remained warm and it remained flexible so that it appeared that Naruto had a really shiny hand. As for how to remove it, well, he was lost on that one. Hell, until that morning, he hadn't even known there was a possibility of him having a bloodline at all. Now he had one, just like Hashirama and Madara, yet he had no idea how it worked. Kurama had informed him that the metal was based largely upon chakra, and that he was going to have to master his own before he could master his bloodline. Unfortunately for Naruto, he also had to maybe master the Kyuubi's chakra as well, since their two chakras mixed frequently, and with the addition of Kurama's chakra into his own, he'd lose control of his bloodline. He could not do that kind of training within the compound. He hadn't told anyone about the Kyuubi. He was sure they knew to some extent that there was something different about him, and a few had even asked about the whisker marks on his face, but so far he'd managed to brush it all aside. Unless he came up with a solution, it was a bloodline he wouldn't be able to use. All training was brought to an abrupt halt as the warring between clans escalated and the Uzumaki were pulling into the fighting via aiding the Senju. Naruto often worked with Tobirama and Hashirama, taking out the enemy, avoiding killing them, and completing their objective efficiently. They were like a three-man cell, Naruto able to use three elements as well as sealing, Tobirama having mastered water style, and Hashirama able to use both water and earth style. Their other talents in taijutsu and kenjutsu made them impossible to beat, especially since Naruto had mastered the Uzumaki taijutsu style. He could still get his ass handed to him, but only by Hashirama and Tobirama. He hadn't tested Izuna and Madara yet, but he was pretty sure they could. The Uzumaki taijutsu was wild, unpredictable, yet graceful, flowing in a way. He moved his body in ways that should have been impossible, ways he had been forced to learn while he'd been in that room. If anyone from a more modern world had seen Naruto fight, they might have said it was almost based on gymnastics, only it packed more of a wallop, with some improvisation thrown in the mix as well. Naruto could use anything in his surroundings that would enable him to get an edge against his opponent. He could jump over pretty much anything, instantly attach himself with chakra to pretty much anything, and he could work around any obstacle in his way. It was great for chakra control, but he was still a long way off from being anywhere close to a medic nin. It was in the middle of these petty skirmished, and indeed they were petty, that Mito and Hashirama were married. The light-hearted celebration was exactly what the Uzumaki and the Senju needed at that moment, as the morale had been waning somewhat. Naruto had helped in the cooking along with the other Uzumaki, thoroughly enjoying it. He honestly loved cooking. There was just something so peaceful about it. And of course, getting to eat the food afterwards was always a given. It was during the ceremony that Naruto left a cage bunchen in his place, having crafted a seal to hide his chakra as he carefully made his way out of the compound. Madara-kun, Izuna-kun. He greeted with a soft smile as he sat down next to them. They were far from the compound, watching as Hashirama married Mito. They couldn't get any closer because of the Uzumaki censors. I heard you became the heir. Madara replied. Congratulations. Hey, thanks. Naruto replied with a slight blush as he looked away. He still found it difficult to handle praise. And your prowess on the battlefield is spreading quickly. Izuna added. Having mastered the way of the Uzumaki appears to have been the best course of action for you. You have won them over completely. Well, wasn't that the plan? Naruto shrugged. Besides, you two are making waves yourselves. I've been hearing about you guys a lot. Most whisper about the Senju brothers and the Uchiha brothers, and when they do it in awe of what you've managed to accomplish at such a young age. Madara and Izuna did not reply, and Naruto understood why. The things they'd managed to accomplish had been based on the necessity to survive. Somehow, both Taijima and Batsuma had figured out that if they sent their sons on missions far above their skill, or maybe it was desperation on their part, but if they sent their sons on higher-ranked missions, the instinct to survive would ensure they came home with a completed mission in tow. It was a messed-up situation and Naruto couldn't wait until Madara and Hashirama were the clan heads respectively. He couldn't understand why the clans fought so much. Everything was always so damn petty. So far he hadn't once encountered a legitimate reason to be fighting. Unless he looked at it as the clans using petty excuses as a cover for a much baser reason, revenge. Things are going to break out in war. Madara whispered. The Uchiha were hired to take a piece of land from a small clan that neighbors the Senju. The Senju won't let it slide so easily. When the battle is done, what would happen to the clan that was originally on the land? Naruto asked, frowning. They will probably be killed off. Izuna sighed. You don't have to contend with a vengeful enemy if there is no enemy in the first place. Naruto sighed before he decided the topic was morbid enough and pulled out a scroll. I brought food. He grinned and the two perked up. Is your cooking as bad as Madara-kun's? Izuna asked carefully. Hey, my cooking skill is still in its training stages. Madara defended with a growl. Naruto laughed. Madara-kun, cooking isn't training. Half the time it's throwing things together just to see how it'll taste. It's freedom. It's something that's entirely your own, yours to control. It's not the same as mastering a jutsu. Try just letting it relax you next time, K? Naruto advised between chuckles. Madara nodded slowly, sinking into his own thoughts. Naruto left him to it as he bit his thumb and swiped it across the seal, summoning the 3 lunches he brought with him. It was the little moments like these that he treasured, where they weren't facing each other across a battlefield wondering how in the world they were going to make it out of there without dying, killing each other, and still manage to avoid suspicion from those around them. It was moments like these that Naruto hoped to have many more of, after they built Konoha. He ducked under the sword that aimed to remove his head from his shoulders with a frustrated growl. This battle was heading nowhere and fast. Not to mention, he still sucked at Kenjutsu. He just hadn't had the time to bring himself up to the level of the ninja that had been relying on Kenjutsu for most of their lives. Then again, hadn't they gotten this good at it by needing to survive by using it? The battlefield, Naruto knew all too well, was the best and most effective teacher, unless one didn't learn the lesson in time. Still, Uzumaki and Senju clashed with Uchiha all around him, the emotions intense and biting. As an Uzumaki censor, everything was a confusing blur of negativity to him and he had been forced to cut his sensing entirely. He was sure most of the Uzumaki had to. The Uzumaki only ever fought in full on battles like this if the Senju asked it of them. They couldn't handle the sensory overload that come with a violent battle such as this one. Naruto ducked again and flew backwards. His opponent was far too keen on skewering him, that was for sure. Keep up Naruto-kun, said Blonde barely had enough time to glance over at Takashi as the other Uzumaki took down his own opponent. The problem here was also the fact that only 5 people on this battlefield weren't trying to kill their opponent. Another problem was the fact that the Uchiha Naruto had knocked out earlier were regaining consciousness and jumping straight back into the fight, killing Senju and Uzumaki alike as they went. Naruto spun away from the sword before dropping to the ground to avoid being fried to a crisp. Those fireballs were really getting on his nerve. What choice did he really have? Did he kill? Or did he go all out? If he did that, would he lose control? He didn't want to kill the Uchiha because that was Madara and Izuna's family. It had to be hard losing people, he knew that it was. He didn't want to ever be the reason someone experienced that kind of pain. But the Uchiha were killing his family, and he had to do something to stop this fighting because everyone was getting hurt. What did he do? Naruto-kun. 2 Uchiha had leapt straight for him while Naruto had carelessly allowed himself get lost within his own thoughts. Takashi had been watching over him even if it had been nothing more than a glance here and there at most. The red-haired Uzumaki sprang away from his own opponent, sword ready to block the one aimed for Naruto's back. But he couldn't block the one aimed for Naruto's side, and used his own body as a shield instead. The blood from the wound splattered across Naruto's face, his eyes wide from shock. Takashi bit back the cry of pain as he pulled his sword away from the one he was blocking only to bring it back down and across the Uchiha's throat. But he knew that it was too late for him. The Uchiha that had aimed for Naruto's side snarled in anger, pulling the sword out of the wound it had created within Takashi's body before bringing it back down, cutting straight through his armor with a chakra-infused blow. This all happened in the space of time where Takashi had pushed Naruto away, causing the team to lose his footing and stumble before tripping over a fallen shinobi. He was helpless as he watched one of his precious people sacrifice their life to save his own. No, not again. Images of Hinata flashed through his mind, and that same rage, that same self-hatred flared within his very soul. A spark of fiery, potent fury ignited from his core, a familiar feeling of psychotic intent flavored with the addictive bloodlust, the desire to end lives, to destroy all that which his eyes took in. But he held back the dark seductive chakra that promised power. He forced his body to move, to strike down the other Uchiha, to kill him. Naruto pushed the Uchiha away from his sword with a sneer of disgust before dropping down to his knees. His barriers that kept everything negative out faltered before dropping entirely, and everything around him, all the pain and death, it slammed into him in one go, and he felt the breath whoosh from his lungs. You really are too good for this world, Naruto-kun. Can't even kill the enemy properly, can you? Takashi smiled softly, a bittersweet one. You shouldn't have been asked to come here. Led them well. Try not to screw up in my absence. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Naruto sobbed as he gripped the other man's armor. But Takashi didn't react to the words, didn't hear them. His eyes were dull, his breathing no more. Naruto's breath caught in his thought when this fact registered in his mind. Everything he'd been holding back since entering this meaningless fight broke loose, and he let out a feral scream of rage laced with the madness of the Kyuubi's power. Hashirama looked away from Madara, his eternal opponent when their clans crashed, as a different type of chakra entirely coated the battlefield. That's Naruto. Madara gasped as he looked to the source. What is this? Don't tell me there's more he didn't tell us? Hashirama's eyes said that he didn't want to believe the words that had spilled from his mouth. Was there something more the blonde hadn't said anything about? Was this some type of jutsu? Hashirama, said Senju, turned to see a blonde in orange armor racing towards him, and he had to conclude that it was a clone. He's lost it, the boss has given in. I don't know what happened, but you need to stop him. The clone yelled desperately. Your Mokuton will suppress it, but you have to hurry. Then the clone destabilized and popped, a grimace of pain on his features as he did so. What the hell is it? Madara snarled, his anger kicking in because that was his defense against that which he did not understand. I don't know, but I have to get closer. Hashirama replied gravely before rushing towards the center of the battlefield. With Naruto's sensing abilities, why on earth had he gone there? Most of the powerful Uzumaki sensors became ranged attackers. But then Naruto's fighting style wasn't long range at all. He would not have had a choice. Madara naturally followed him to where Naruto was, and the closer they got, the more powerful the chakra's intent became. All around them battles were stopping, the utter hopelessness that the chakra inspired sinking in fast. An inhuman roar of pain ripped through the air, and Hashirama watched as the blonde Uzumaki from the future gripped at his hair, an ungodly red chakra hissing and bubbling around him like a protective cloak. A cloak that burned and peeled away his very skin. Hashirama had stopped running without even realizing it, gaping at the image in front of him. Wild, untamable locks of blonde danced to the ferocity of the bubbling chakra as feral red slitted eyes shifted from shinobi to shinobi. Elongated canines pressed together in a snarl of rage and hatred, a deep growl reverberating throughout Naruto's body. Claws scrapped against skin as Naruto pulled his hands through his hair, uncaring of the damage he was doing to himself. Oh no. Hashirama breathed out, barely audible as his eyes fell on the fallen shinobi by Naruto's feet. Takashi, kill. A roar of determination. I will kill. I don't think he even has a semblance of rationality right now. Madara managed to stutter out. Hashirama frowned at the Uzumaki. He had managed to stop the fighting, all of it, as every pair of eyes on the field was now turned to him. Naruto was just full of surprises. That furious demonic gaze fell on Madara and Hashirama, and Naruto's lips stretched even more to display an inhuman smirk of insane sadism. Hashirama blinked, and suddenly the blonde was standing in front of him. I don't think I'll let you two stop me this time. You're the most annoying humans to ever roam this land, the two who could control me outside of a seal. Naruto's whispered in Hashirama's ear, the voice not Naruto's. The boy is finally vulnerable enough to let me have this brief moment of control, and I will make use of it. I will kill those accursed Uchiha. You can build your forsaken village without them. What are you?" Hashirama choked out. The killing intent that was rolling off Naruto was making him sick, almost unable to stand. He had never felt anything like this. "You will come to know me in time, Senju. You are the first of the shinobi world to encounter my kind after all, aside from those of Suna." Suna? What the hell was Suna? But he didn't get the chance to ask. An arm wrapped around his middle and he was yanked backwards so rapidly it was dizzying. "Where the hell is your head, Aniki?" Tobirama demanded as he let go of Hashirama. "He was about to kill you." Panicked Uzumaki around them sprang forward, hands flying through seals that would trap Naruto within a barrier. "Your Mokuton will suppress it, but you have to hurry." The clone's frantic words from earlier rushed through Hashirama's mind and he cringed. If stopping whatever this was relied on his Mokuton, then they were in trouble because he was still struggling to get the perfect ratio. Then again, what other time was there if not this one to get it right? He didn't have any jutsu in mind because he hadn't gotten that far. He ignored that fact and sprang forwards, ignoring Tobirama's yell of protest. He focused his chakra, forcing two different types of chakra to move to each hand. Skidding to a halt just in front of Naruto, Hashirama slammed his palms together, blending earth and water together so that 4 pillars of wood sprouted from the ground. Hashirama focused his attention on the pillars as Naruto snarled at him and sprang away from them. It became a game of cat and mouse, Naruto staying just out of reach and Hashirama increasing the amount of pillars he had shooting after the blonde. Hashirama's control over the pillars wasn't nearly as great as Naruto's flexibility. Hell, but that teen could bend his body in ways that shouldn't have even been possible. Naruto turned to the Mokuton user with a snarl before rushing straight for Hashirama, faster than what he could react to. The Senju was completely unprepared for the burning mass of chakra that slammed into him before Naruto was close enough to even think about touching him. Looking up from where he had landed, Hashirama saw a chakra hand construct recede back towards Naruto. That could get troublesome. But then the barrier the Uzumaki had been trying to erect flickered into existence, surrounding the rampant teen. Naruto slammed his body against the barrier, but it didn't yield to his violent attacks. "What the hell is that?" Hashirama demanded from the nearest Uzumaki. "We're not sure, but it appears that the chakra that sometimes leaks into Naruto-kun's pathways has taken over. It's not natural, whatever this chakra is." Hashirama frowned before turning his attention back to the barrier. Naruto's condition seemed to be getting worse, the chakra around him growing more potent. Taking a chance, he focused his chakra again, trying to will the wooden pillars to grow faster. He didn't have time for them to be any slower because Naruto was too fast. He managed to snag Naruto's ankle, his pillars able to grow from that single point till the wood completely covered Naruto aside from his head. Angry hisses and snarls erupted from Naruto as the chakra began to fade, slowly sinking into Naruto's body. Hashirama didn't know why, but he was able to suppress whatever this was, and for some reason, Naruto had known this. What had happened and what was Naruto not telling them? Chapter 8. End. Chapter 9. Start. When Naruto woke up far more slowly than what he usually did, he knew that something was wrong, possibly very wrong. Then he became aware of the water and was instantly more alert due to the adrenaline that spiked through his system, because water meant Kurama. Kurama was a rather undesirable fox to see when one was supposed to be in the middle of a clan war. Yet he could not sense any fighting. Was that because he was here? Or because it had stopped? He got to his feet, endlessly fascinated with the fact that the water, while liquidy, was never actually wet. He wasn't directly by Kurama's cage, but he was close enough. The walk there would help. The walk there allowed him time to try and sort through his memories. He wasn't sure what had happened, and he was even less sure that he wanted to find out because he did remember the burning ecstasy that came with using the Kyuubi's chakra. And using the fox's power never ended well. Flashes of rage, infuriation and frustration bubbled to the forefront of his mind, but nothing that could actually tell him what he'd done while he'd been under the fox's influence. His thoughts strayed and froze on the fact that Takashi was dead, that he was gone and that it was all his fault. He had been so fixated on trying not to kill the enemy, on trying to decide what he should do, that he had failed to realize what was truly important. Sacrifice was needed. That's what Hashirama and Madara's entire existence was all about. Just look at the history of his own village. He was a fool for not seeing it sooner, but then, hadn't he always been a fool? Hadn't he always been the idiot ninja who was too loud, who didn't know any better? He didn't even know what to say to that anymore. Did he even really have an answer before? Funerals. How did the Uzumaki handle funerals? He'd yet to see one and he wasn't entirely sure he really wanted to see one now. He had all this power, but he was still so useless, so weak. What would Sasuke say if he saw Naruto now? As the clan heir, could he say that he'd already failed his clan? It sure felt like it. He'd failed the first friend in this world that hadn't known his secret, and that was the whole reason Takashi's friendship had meant something so different to him. Madara, Izuna, Hashirama and Tobirama, they were precious to him, but Takashi had been something different. Not more, just different. Maybe it was because he hadn't known the truth, had realized that Naruto was hiding something, yet he'd still accepted Naruto, in spite of all his faults. Madara and Hashirama had seen him as the proof of their dreams first and a friend second. That didn't make their bond any less precious. Just different. Now Takashi was dead and it was all Naruto's fault. Naruto wasn't even supposed to exist in this world. Takashi wasn't supposed to have died. And to make it worse, Naruto could have prevented it all. He had the power. All he'd have had to do was reveal Sage Mode. The Uchiha would have recognized him, and the Senju would be quick to follow. The attention would have been focused on him and not each other. Problem was, that placed Hashirama and Tobirama in trouble, and that was also likely to only work once. The fighting didn't appear to be stopping anytime soon. Stop being so morbid, brat, it's giving me a headache. The deep growl-like grumble of the Kyuubi reached him before he even got to the fox's cage. I'm allowed to be morbid. Naruto muttered. I'm just a dobi, a foolish dobi at that. All this training. It hasn't changed anything. Doesn't sound like the annoying human I thought you to be. Kurama shifted as Naruto rounded the corner and walked towards the cage. But then I'm not complaining. When you're weak of heart and mind, I have free reign of your body. I can force as much chakra as I want on you. A dark chuckle that promised chaos and violence. Naruto's head snapped up from where it had been slumped on his shoulders before. His gaze sharpened as his eyes narrowed. What did you do? Nothing lasting. I was stopped before I could. The disappointment in the fox's tone was far too evident, and strangely Naruto felt relieved by it. If the fox was disappointed, then that was good for him, mostly at the very least. What did you try doing? Naruto demanded, tone growing angrier as his thoughts became panicked. Kurama could have killed someone, could have seriously hurt his precious people. How hadn't Naruto been aware of that? Naruto glared hard at the fox when he didn't appear to want to answer, and it almost looked like Kurama was guilty or something. Well, kill the Senju and Uchiha brats. Kurama stated tonelessly as though trying to appear indifferent. You what? See, that's why I didn't want to tell you. You're so unreasonably loud. Kurama grumbled. Why the hell would you try to do that? Naruto screamed, moving past rationality and into a rage that was rarely thought capable from the blonde. The Kyuubi responded with his own anger, easily matching Naruto's churning storm with his particular raging inferno. He got to his feet with a warning growl, but Naruto didn't stop. Damn it, Kurama. I've been trying to keep you a secret. You don't have to respond to my emotions every frickin' time. Naruto continued, pacing slightly as his frustration built. What the hell is wrong with you? Don't question me, you brat. Kurama snapped, snarling down at Naruto, the dull lighting around them failing to hide the gleam of his razor-like teeth. You tried to kill my precious people. Naruto screamed, stopping his pacing as he whipped his entire body around to face the fox with a glare he'd only ever directed at Sasuke. What the hell is up with that? You know, I can't believe I was actually foolish enough to trust that you and I were finally starting to understand each other, maybe even become friends. I guess I'm just as much a dobi as ever. Naruto's tone had begun angry, vicious and biting, but as he continued, it grew softer, trailing off as the self-doubt clawed at him. You will never understand me, boy. Kyuubi hissed back, tone reminding Naruto strangely of someone who was striking out because they had been hurt. And I find it disgustingly offensive that you even presumed that you, a lowly mortal, ever could. Friendship is something we will never share. Understand that now, and understand it well. Then let me try. You say I'll never understand you, but you've never given me a chance. Naruto snapped, not in the mood for the fox's temperamental games. You speak of peace and achieving that which no other Hokage has ever managed to obtain in their reign, yet you know nothing of what it means to wear that hat. Naruto blinked owlishly at the swift change in topic, not quite sure how it was connected. But before he could comment, the fox continued. You have no idea what it truly means to be a founder of your pathetic village. What was sacrificed in order to bring it to fruition? You are blissfully oblivious in your ignorance, and I both envy you and pity you for it. Keep in mind, brat, that you still don't know what true sacrifice is. Your father knew it. He was the Yellow Flash after all. A man who had developed a jutsu that had the ability to kill thousands in mere moments. Do you think he slept peacefully at night because of it? Hardly. Yet he did it because his Hokage asked him to. The very man that was taught by Tobirama and Hashirama. They will ask the same thing of you when the time comes, and you will have to kill your enemy. Not be pitiful and merely knock them out. What does that really achieve? What do you mean? Naruto asked, confused in more than just physically. Kurama had never spoken like this before. It was almost like he was frustrated, agitated or something. Did you really believe that your precious Konoha sprung up overnight and was then left alone? Think about it for once, brat. Konoha, as you learnt from the one called Nagato, needed money from war to prosper. All of the larger ninja villages did. A world of peace as you brats aim for is not consistent with this. As we already know, peace was not achieved. The first great shinobi war happened, then the second and the third, with the fourth brewing on the horizon. Kurama explained, his tone showing just how annoyed and agitated he was. What was he so upset about? The Uchiha and the Senju were the two most hired clans. As rivals, it didn't help business for either of them when they entered the peace agreement. Where do you think Konoha gained the assets and the funds to actually be built and survive long enough in order to establish themselves as a permanent settlement of ninja? You're not saying that Konoha started the first shinobi war, are you? Naruto whispered, eyes wide in terror of the very thought, even having an inkling of truth to it. It was entirely possible as well. With Tobirama as the driving force, and a shrewd one at that, he could easily convince Hashirama, who in turn would convince the Uchiha that such a course of action was the right one. Yet, something about that just wouldn't sink in for Naruto. He would need the proof before he even considered it as a possibility. I wouldn't care, foolish human, if their actions resulted in the death of more foolish humans. I wouldn't have tried to kill them if that were merely my problem with the brats. Kurama growled. Think. It's barely believable that you are the toad's child of prophecy. Naruto gave the fox an unamused look before sighing heavily, posture slumping downwards once again. Just spit it out already. The Biju. My brethren. That is what I'm referring to. Do you not remember your academy instructor telling you about the Shodai Hokage and how he, as one of his first actions of peace, was to divide the Biju he had collected? The nerve of that. Like some object of materialism that can be added to your selfish perceptions of wealth, to divide the Biju amongst the 5 hidden villages, creating the fickle thing you know as the balance of power. It was his hope for peace. That is the official version for you whelps. Kurama paused, his frustration and agitation growing large enough for a moment that he was unable to actually place thoughts into rational words. You, as a Jinchuriki, have felt at least a fraction of the fear and the irrational anger that humans have towards us. They don't see us as anything more than mindless beasts with endless volumes of chakra. Since the creation of your villages, we have been used for nothing but personal gain, for chaos and violence. You blame us for the madness you have created within us and condemn us for your own foolish selfishness. You, as a Jinchuriki, are placed in this category as well. You are damned to a cycle of hatred and fear that has been born from ignorance and greed of your own creation. I don't understand, Naruto admitted. Kurama was going in circles and he was struggling to keep up. He did understand that this was something the fox felt very strongly about. Look around you, Naruto. This isn't exactly a luxury den. Kurama snorted. We are treated with fear, prejudice and hatred. We are forced to give over our chakra, to comply with your violent wars and cruel existences. We are tied down to you pathetic mortals so that we cannot escape, cannot wait for you to die, because that would mean our own demise. We are collected and traded like toys in a schoolyard, only to be carelessly discarded when we are no longer of use. ... You realize that I am placing Jinchuriki into this category as well. So you tried to kill Madara and Hashirama because of the Jinchuriki? Naruto questioned. Hardly. That foolishness was invented by Suna. No, I tried to kill them because they grew powerful enough to control me and my kind. Powerful enough to collect us. You still don't understand what it means to wear the Hokage's hat. You, who struggles to kill the enemy because it might hurt a few feelings. Madara and Hashirama grew to be legends in your eyes, yet no one remembers the sacrifices they had to make to get to those pedestals that your generation has placed them upon. You still haven't realized just how much you're going to have to sacrifice to build that beloved village. You've already come to the conclusion that others will not sit back and let you achieve this dream peacefully. There will be resistance. Which brings us back to Konoha, the foundations of their prosperity and the division of the Biju. Hashirama sold the Biju to the other villages for money in order to help maintain peace and mostly to build Konoha. Kurama pinned Naruto with a steely yet fiery gaze. Your brilliant Shodai Hokage gave weapons of destruction, weapons you idiot mortals created, to your enemies. So in other words, he might not have started the war, but he did give them the means to believe they could win. Naruto whispered. Oh? And how do you reach that conclusion? Kurama scoffed. When a ninja has a powerful tool, most tend to forget about limitations. I've seen it happen. They don't understand how their tool works and know only that it has the potential to be extremely powerful in battle. Potential is nothing without understanding. None of the hidden villages understood the tailed beasts they had bought, but they did understand that they were beasts of immense amounts of chakra and therefore potentially powerful weapons. Naruto explained with a heavy sigh. They would have grown arrogant and attacked, believing themselves to be the victor because of the tailed beasts they possessed. Humph. Your time with the Uzumaki does not appear to have been entirely a waste. Kurama scoffed. But yes, you could say that. Or you could say that you foolish humans cannot live in a world of peace. It is in your nature to be violent. You yourself are a ninja, whose very definition is a silent killer. Naruto did not reply. What could he really say? Arguing with an immortal construct of chakra was harder than it had any right to be. Besides, Kurama was being difficult about the whole thing anyway. The blonde Uzumaki shook his head, thinking things over before nodding his head once and walking closer to the furball's cage. Kurama watched his every step, not saying a single thing as Naruto got close enough to slip through the bars. Instead, Naruto stopped just in front of them, close enough to almost touch them with his forehead if he sneezed. Kurama, I'm going to make you a promise, a once-in-a-lifetime promise. Naruto began quietly, looking down at the ground. And what comfort must I find in a mortal promise, no less a mortal who couldn't even uphold his last once-in-a-lifetime promise. Kurama scoffed, the puff of breath ruffling Naruto's hair. The blonde grit his teeth but otherwise didn't get visibly upset with the fox. Instead, he continued with his chosen decision. I promise you, that Jinchuriki will have no meaning in this world. No one will ever become one. I promise you that I will find a way, no matter what, to ensure that the tailed beasts are never used by ninja again. Kurama was far too quiet for Naruto's comfort, but he didn't move as he waited for the fox's reply. When it did come, he had to resist the urge to jump in surprise because it was just that sudden. You cannot keep that promise. You won't live forever and humans are too greedy for power to simply leave us alone. I will find a way. Dappeiyo. Naruto stated firmly. That is my promise of a lifetime to you. Do as you will, Uzumaki. But know this, the day you find a permanent way, is the day I will cooperate with you fully. Then you may use that blasted bloodline of yours. But I should warn you. Your bloodline inherently suppresses my chakra. Your mother was chosen as a Jinchuriki for this reason alone. That is for you to ponder and for you to decide. These are my terms. I know yours. Now leave me. Kurama turned his back without so much as a swish of his tails as growled out his reply. Naruto didn't understand what had gotten the furball in such a bad mood, but he didn't have time to contemplate it. He had a far bigger and far more important project on his hands. He wasn't doing this for himself, so Kurama's words meant nothing to him. He was doing this for them. The tailed beasts and all their Jinchuriki. And he would succeed. It was his ninja way. Naruto opened his eyes only to see the shimmery haze of a barrier. The slight snap of lightning told him that it probably wasn't a good idea to approach it. But with his training he knew what kind of barrier it was, how to create it and most importantly, how to break it down. The clan head would know this, so why had they used this particular barrier? A test perhaps? If he was under the influence of the Kyuubi's chakra, then he'd probably rush right for it a few times. But as himself he could either sit passively in the center or he could break it down himself. Which did he choose? But then, Takashi was dead. And that was all his fault. A lot of deaths were his fault and that was something he wasn't quite sure he knew how to deal with. What did he say to Takashi's family? What did he say to the other Uzumaki? How did he explain Kurama? Naruto couldn't sense anything outside the barrier, couldn't see anything either. So he didn't even know who was watching him because this barrier was designed to be see-through from the outside. He lifted a hand to his forehead and immediately regretted it. Using Kurama's chakra always made him feel like he'd been run over afterwards. How many tails had he gone up to? Had to have been at least 4 with the way his body felt. Everything burned and all his muscles were tensed up. He had to get moving, to stretch everything out. The faster he did that, the quicker the pain went away. Without the adrenaline of immediate danger to help him, he was just going to have to do this the hard way. Even if all he managed was a basic academy kata, that was at least a start. With that in mind, the blonde Uzumaki braced himself mentally before slowly and painfully getting to his feet. He would do this. It was no different from when he was recovering from the time jump. Just a little more painful, like a really bad case of sunburn. He could do this, one step at a time. He'd figure out what to do about Kyuubi later, he'd come up with a way to tell the Uzumaki about what he really was. They'd told him to stay away but he just couldn't. Hashirama gazed at the barrier with distant eyes. Naruto was still in there, like some caged animal. The Senju heir had begged and pleaded the Uzumaki to allow him inside the barrier if only to heal Naruto because whatever had happened to him, it had hurt him and badly. All his skin had been completely burned off. Watching him get to his feet now, seeing the way he struggled to do such a simple thing, Hashirama knew that it had indeed been painful. Hashirama watched helplessly as Naruto moved into a stance, the blonde's body seeming to rebel against him. A standard, far too simple kata and Naruto couldn't even move through the motions without jerking unexpectedly and sometimes even violently. How long has he been awake? Hashirama startled at the sudden appearance of the Uzumaki clan head and quickly rose to his feet so that he could bow to the older man. Who also happened to be his father-in-law. About 2 hours, Uzumaki-sama. Hashirama replied. Ah, so then he has had 2 hours to break this barrier. I wonder why he has not. The clan head mused. I'm sure he knows how. If I may, I believe he thinks it will make his situation worse if he does break it. Hashirama replied slowly. The clan head did not reply immediately but Hashirama made mastered enough of sensing to feel the contemplative edge to the older shinobi's chakra. Do you know what that was? The clan head stated eventually. The way he acted. No, I'm afraid I do not. Hashirama admitted quietly. The Uzumaki sighed and sat down heavily next to Hashirama. The poor Senju could only think that this man was his father-in-law. And that was a daunting thought if ever there was one. Hashirama lowered himself back to his feet more slowly than the other ninja, waiting patiently for him to speak once again. We among the Uzumaki have our own theories and we pray that we are wrong because if we are correct, then we fear the kind of person who believed it would be necessary to do such a thing to a child. And we believe he was only a child. His familiarity with his situation shows practice. The fact that he felt he had to hide it leads us to believe in our theories as well. Hashirama swallowed at the dark undertone that the clan head's words held. And what do you think happened to him? He almost didn't want to know. Well, as Uzumaki, we are rather curious, especially when it comes to sealing. When we had learned all that we could about sealing while settled in one place, the Wandering Fraction was born. One of the things that the Wandering Fraction was particularly interested in was a theory that the Uzumaki had developed. It had long been speculated that an entity or a body of chakra could be sealed within another living being. I won't go into the reasons for that as it is irrelevant and rather numerous. However, it was just a theory and one that no one wished to attempt no matter who volunteered for the project. The whole idea was left as nothing more than something to discuss late into the night when nothing else was forthcoming. So you think that something is sealed within Naruto-kun? Hashirama asked, eyes wide with disbelief. It would explain the rage-ruled chakra within him. It is a chakra that is not naturally his own. What will happen to him now? Hashirama asked, eyes growing dejected at the thought that Naruto would no longer be the heir to the clan. He'd worked hard for that. We will talk to him. The barrier was merely because we did not know what state of mind he would be in when he woke. If he was still under the influence of the other chakra, then the barrier would have held him and prevented him from harming others. However, if he was no longer under its influence, then he could easily break through it. Those were our thoughts on the matter. Then perhaps he will need to be told. It doesn't look like he's going to break that barrier anytime soon. Hashirama suggested meekly. He will come out when he is ready. The Uzumaki were eternally a mystery to the Senju boy and he was married to one. Perhaps it was time he learned. Otherwise he was going to be left floundering around behind them for many more years to come. Naruto stared at the ground miserably. He had no idea how long he'd been in the barrier and he wondered how much longer he was going to have to stay within it. He knew they had to at least know he was awake and he also knew that he'd been there long enough to work out all the tension from his muscles. With hindsight, that might not have been the greatest idea. Well, maybe it had been, but there were drawbacks. He could move freely now, no aches and pains. But he was so frickin' hungry. What he wouldn't give to have some ramen. He hadn't had ramen in months. Oh, the sacrilege. It was an insult to the very gods of ramen of the highest degree. He deserved to be in this barrier. Sighing miserably, the teen stretched out on the ground, glad that the Uzumaki had been thoughtful enough to give him the room to do so and upon a nice patch of grass. He didn't even have any storage scrolls with him. Another zing and crackle of lightning accompanied by another sigh. Strangely, the lightning sounded wrong to him. It always did when he was around anything lightning-based. He supposed it was because it lacked the high chirping of 1,000 birds. A sound that reminded him painfully of the world he'd lost and would never see again. Both Sasuke Teme and Kakashi-sensei used that kind of lightning, and with them came Sakura-chan. His team. Heck, even Sai was on his team. And Yamato Taiko. The ragtag bunch of misfits that made up the unusual yet effective Team 7. A team that wouldn't exist again. Not that Naruto would see anyway. He'd be long dead by the time they were born again. He'd be just a distant memory of a bloody past. Perhaps he'd even get to have the title of one of the founding fathers of Konoha. But that wasn't really important to him. And he'd never see Ichiraku ramen again. He knew how to make the noodles. He knew how to make them well. But he'd never learned how to make the rest because that had been Old Man Tucci's job. He was just so hungry. Maybe he should just bust out. But then what if the barrier was there as a test and by breaking out he failed it? Arg, he was just so confused. Why put a barrier around him that he could actually break out of if they didn't want him to break out of it? Another zing and crackle of the wrong kind of lightning and Naruto growled in annoyance. One more of those and he was officially going to fix it. Just a few modifications here, a blast of chakra there, and there one had it, a Chidori encased barrier. Sure, it would be way stronger and a lot harder to break out of, but it would sound right. Just one more of those zing crackle things and he was doing it. He already had half a seal formula in mind. Just one more. Man, he was hungry. I don't think he'd going to break out. Tobirama muttered as he sat with his older brother. Naruto was currently stretched out on the ground, a slight frown on his features as he contemplated something. Every so often the blonde would wince, but whether he realized he was doing it was another story. Maybe he'll come out when he's hungry. Hashirama suggested, slight hope coloring his tone. No, I don't even think then. He's probably already hungry. Tobirama replied, his frown deepening. Then maybe we should get Mito-chan to bust him out. Hashirama sighed and his younger brother felt his eyebrow twitch as he sensed another bout of depression coming on. Look, he's moving. Tobirama stated quickly, leaving out the part where it seemed that Naruto had developed a twitch of his own. Both their hopes soared when Naruto began to make hand signs, but that hopes were cruelly dashed when Naruto slammed his hand on the ground and the barrier did not come down. No, instead, it appeared to have been made stronger. Where a slight crackle had filled the air every now and then before, a full-blown wave of noise replaced it. Does that sound like birds to you? Hashirama asked, eyebrows pulled together in confusion. Yeah, like an awful lot of them. But never mind that. Look at the level of the lightning chakra around the barrier. It shouldn't be that visible. Tobirama replied. I think now would be a good time to call the clan head. It took the Uzumaki 3 days to break Naruto out of the barrier he himself had strengthened. By the time they did, Naruto was completely unresponsive. He hadn't eaten or had anything to drink for 4.5 days and he'd been exposed to the lightning chakra for far too long. It took another 2 days to heal the moron, and in that time Hashirama had never seen the Uzumaki clan look so grim. But then they could have just been angry at the blonde. Hashirama knew that they were extremely family-orientated and Naruto had foolishly and needlessly placed himself in danger. I don't understand why he didn't just break out. Mito muttered as she watched Hashirama check Naruto over. Hashirama had come far with his medical ninjutsu and he still had a long way to go. But that still made him one of the best because there weren't many other medic nins. Think about it. He just rampaged across the battlefield after losing someone very precious to him. Not to mention that he lost that precious person because they were protecting him. He probably doesn't feel he deserves to. Tobirama muttered quietly. Not only that, this is a secret of Naruto's that he's hidden from everyone. Hashirama sighed. He had to have a reason. It's because I've always been hated for what I am. Hunted. Naruto's raspy voice filled the small room he'd been placed in a moment before his eyes blinked open slowly. And it's become somewhat of a habit to not mention anything about it. You are so grounded, Naruto-kun. Mito immediately yelled, not skipping a beat even after Naruto's sudden return to consciousness. Don't you ever do that again. What the hell were you thinking? Do you have any idea of what it took to get you out of there? But the lightning sounded wrong. Naruto protested with a frown. I had to fix it. What do you mean? Lightning chakra always sounds like that. Tobirama frowned, not quite understanding what Naruto was getting at. All my ninja career I've been exposed to one very specific lightning-based ninjutsu. And its intensity was so great that it sounded like 1,000 birds chirping at once and was hence named the Chidori. Naruto explained. Such an attack would have garnered a reputation on the battlefield, yet I have never heard of it. All four in the room turned towards the Senju clan head as he walked through the door. Batsuma's gaze was cold, calculating. Tobirama and Hashirama flinched, knowing that it was never a good sign. Just behind Batsuma, the Uzumaki clan head hovered in the doorway, his own features equally as grim. Naruto, it's good to see you awake. A neutral statement of a clan head and not the near father-like figure he'd come to represent to Naruto. I guess you all want an explanation. Naruto muttered, having not missed the lack of the kun tagged onto the end of his name. I'll say. Mito mumbled under her breath and Hashirama silently pulled her hand into his own and gave it a gentle squeeze. Naruto looked away, eyes growing distant before he sighed heavily. My mother was the Uzumaki, this I have already told you. While my mother was a part of the wandering fraction, it was my father who could not bear to leave his home. My parents had a love strong enough for my mother to put aside her desires to travel and to remain in one place. She stayed with my father. Naruto began and Batsuma almost interrupted, not sure how this was relevant, but a slight shift from the Uzumaki clan head made him pause. My mother grew to love my father's home just as much as he did, and together they strove to protect it. So naturally, the day it was attacked, they defended our home no matter the cost to themselves. Naruto paused then, a small frown on his features. The village was being attacked by a beast that could not be killed. It was a beast that inspired fear and left nothing but death and destruction in its wake. While my father was powerful, he could not find a way to stop the beast without using a sacrifice. Using their own lives as payment, my parents sealed the beast within me. By this stage, Naruto's tone was dead, unattached. But you said your parents were killed by an enemy clan. Batsuma pointed out. The beast did not happen upon our home by chance. It was directed there by our enemy. At this, Naruto's gaze hardened and his chakra filled with a barely contained rage. If your parents fought so hard to protect it, why did you not remain in the village? Mito asked quietly. At first I did. But the people there, they learned of what my parents had done and they could no longer see me as merely a child. All they saw was the demon that had taken so much from them. They changed, treated me differently. I was a child, who was orphaned and had nowhere to go. Yet I stayed there, despite their hatred of me. It was my home too. Naruto's features softened slightly, a deep suffering dominating his eyes. Hashirama didn't think Naruto even realized that the pain was there to begin with. There were some few that treated me like a person and not the demon I housed. They were my precious people. They kept me sane. One day, I returned back from a training trip, and the entire village was destroyed. Gone. The people were all but wiped out, with only a few survivors managing to pull themselves out of the rubble. See, the enemy had returned and they wanted their beast back. Naruto paused. His entire frame was shaking, his chakra growing more turbulent. I realized that it was no longer safe for me to stay in one place, for those around me and for myself, so I did what my mother had always desired to do, and I wandered away. I drifted around until I found Hashirama. I had been without company for so long that I could not resist his offer to lead me home. Naruto finally turned his gaze back to them, only they landed on Hashirama and stayed there. They silently conveyed to the Senju that Naruto was talking about Konoha. Konoha was his home and it had been destroyed. This enemy of yours, are they powerful? Batsuma asked in a clipped tone. Hi, they were. But I neutralized them. Naruto shrugged. There was no point worrying over something that didn't exist anymore. Then why did you feel the need to leave? Tobirama pointed out, far too perceptive. For the first little while, I didn't actually know how many there were, so I wandered around. Every time I encountered one, I killed them since they didn't attack altogether. Eventually, they stopped coming. So I just assumed that they're either not going to bother anymore or they're all dead. Naruto shrugged. How are they identified? Batsuma asked. Mind probably already going over reports and information the Senju had received. Again Naruto shrugged. No actual markings. They didn't wear any symbols or anything. I just saw it as usually the ones that just attacked me for no reason. Those guys were all crazy, Datbeo. Naruto pouted to show his inner displeasure at the Akatsuki. Not that those in the room would understand that. Alright Naruto-kun. You didn't say anything because in the past you'd been treated unfairly due to your burden. Also you felt it safer for those around you if they didn't know. Correct? The Uzumaki clan head rumbled thoughtfully. Hi. Naruto replied quietly. Then I have no choice but to remove you from active battlefield rotation and place you directly into full-time blacksmith apprenticeship. Understood? Hi, honorable one. Naruto titled his head forward slightly as he replied. He couldn't help but glance over at Hashirama and Tobirama through his lashes. Their expressions were carefully controlled, but he knew them both well enough to know that they were about as happy as he was, which wasn't very. Without him on the battlefield, he had no control over what happened to the Senju and the Uchiha. However, hadn't he already proved that he was hardly adequate for the job? Besides, in his past and their future, they'd managed to survive without him. Perhaps this path was for the best. Perhaps without Naruto's interference, it would all work out for the best. It had to. Not to mention, Naruto had a promise to keep. One that was going to require a lot of studying on his part. He intended to keep his promise. No matter what, Izuna scaled the side of the cliff easily enough. He'd done so on many occasions. He was sad to say that he'd also done so on many occasions for the exact reason he was doing it now. Aniki. Izuna greeted softly as he approached his older brother, who was seated at the very edge of the cliff, eyes distant, turned towards the vast lands below them. Those were the Uchiha clan lands. So much land that they didn't use. Yet they defended it, stopped anyone else from having it. Though, later, it would become part of Konoha, so Izuna supposed that it wasn't all bad. Hi, Zuna. Madara's greeting was as distant as his gaze. Izuna knew that this time, Madara was thinking about Naruto. The older shinobi from the future had sent a shadow clone to them that had explained everything. It had helped to clip a few puzzle pieces into place, but it was still a rather sad tale with many holes in it. In fact, Izuna had caught more than a few dark winces upon Naruto's features as he'd talked to this enemy clan. Dark winces that he'd tried to hide from Madara especially. Why Madara? Why did the beast within Naruto wish to kill Madara and Hashirama? It is time to return to the compound. Izuna uttered quietly, hardly ever speaking above more than a slight whisper. He was always that way though. Already? How long have I been here? Madara would come here to escape the expectations of being clan heir. And Izuna would follow due to much the same expectations. Only Izuna was to take Madara's place should he fall like their brothers had before them. Madara would lose himself to time, thoughts wandering over to things he could not change and things he was determined to drastically alter. Such as Konoha. Now though, today, his thoughts were on Naruto. Today? Only about 3 hours. But the sun sets. Izuna replied. The sun setting meant nighttime, where clansmen were on high alert and Uchiha or not, returning late, was highly dangerous. Just as it was for any of the most powerful clans. Izuna. Madara stated tonelessly as he got to his feet swiftly. Tomorrow, we train harder. Hi, Aniki. The sting of defeat at Naruto's hands would burn Madara for a while yet. Having watched Hashirama bring the blonde down hadn't helped matters at all. Taijima had been harsh and demanding. More so than what Madara and Izuna had ever seen from him before. So logically, to Madara, more training was required. He didn't like being left behind, and he felt very much like he was behind. Madara and Hashirama were very easily best friends, but that only meant the rivalry was so much more intense. Why did you remove such a useful tool from the battlefield? Batsuma was quick to voice his thoughts the moment he was alone with the Uzumaki clan head. He is not a tool, and it is that very attitude that will destroy ninja. The Uzumaki clan head stated immediately. And I removed him because it is a power he cannot control. He is a danger to those around him, both enemy and friend alike. Did he not attack your son directly? Hi, that he did. Batsuma looked away, not willing to show the depth of the pain that stunt had caused him. Also, exposing Naruto-kun to the ninja world is like inviting them all to create something like him, or to try their very best to assassinate him. He is valuable, but only in that he proves that he is something that is possible. I believe the term is Jinchuriki. The Uzumaki head explained further. Then train him. He is valuable. He could turn the tides in this blasted war. Batsuma grumbled. Ah, but you see, young Naruto-kun has the Uzumaki bloodline. It is not well known that the Uzumaki even have a bloodline, but we do. And we usually keep it away from the battlefield, for its uses are more plentiful than mere death and destruction, such as the Sharingan. Tell me, Senju-sama, do you see the armor and the swords of the Uzumaki clan? Hi. A craftsmanship so delicate that most clans sacrifice many of their numbers to learn your secrets. It has long been discussed, the mystery of the vanishing Uzumaki swords. When an Uzumaki falls in battle, their armor and weapons go with them. Am I finally to learn the truth behind this matter? A low chuckle of amusement. That is simple yet clever, sealing Senju-sama. Our weapons and armor are all tailored to each Uzumaki within the clan. It would not work quite the same way for anyone else should they attempt to use it. But each weapon, each piece of armor, that is all crafted by our bloodline, and only those who have mastered their bloodline completely can create such weapons. A bloodline that creates weapons. That is most useful. You would enjoy watching an Uzumaki use such a bloodline in battle. If Naruto-kun can master his bloodline, then he will be far more useful than a rampaging chakra powerhouse. Very few can match the adaptable and volatile nature that the Uzumaki bloodline can be. Ah, I see now. You were making an invested decision. A tool is only as good as the user. You're simply ensuring that Naruto-kun will master a tool he can understand and use to its fullest potential. Batsuma allowed himself a small appreciative chuckle. Hi. Yet I fear that Naruto's circumstances have compromised his ability to use his bloodline effectively. It is something that requires the most delicate of chakra control. Naruto-kun is very lacking in this regard, an issue that makes more sense to me now. A heavy sigh. What do you make of his story? He speaks the truth, yet there have been no reports of what has happened to him in any of the surrounding villages. How far has he traveled? Batsuma shook his head. I have never heard of that Chidori jutsu he spoke of, so how far indeed? That is a question I sense that we will never know the answer to. And Batsuma couldn't help but wonder why the Uzumaki clan head was so unaffected by that, yet it was not his place to say more. He would just have to trust that the other ninja knew what he was doing. He certainly had more experience than Batsuma. Naruto was also to be the boy that took the elder Uzumaki's place, and for the sake of the Uzumaki and the Senju, Batsuma hoped they wouldn't regret not trying to learn more about Naruto's origins. Chapter 9. End. Chapter 10. Start. Madara closed his eyes and tried to calm his breathing. He was too young for this. He didn't want to do this. Yet he'd done this 1,000 times before. Just not like this. He'd never imagined he'd have to do this. Izuna's slightly elevated breathing from next to him told Madara that the boy felt the same way. Yet they were both compelled to obey. They had no choice. None at all. Lest they join those kneeling in front of them. By clan law, you four have been found guilty of treason. Taijima's soft, toneless voice drummed loudly into Madara's eardrums, and he wished he was out on a mission, fighting Hashirama, killing an enemy. Anything. Just so that he didn't have to be here. Here. Where his face was cold, an expressionless mask that belied his true feelings and almost a mirror of his father's. His hands were calm, by his sides and completely under his control. His entire posture was relaxed, as though he'd been doing this his whole life. He was 16 now, 2 years since Naruto had landed in this world. Roughly a year and a half since he'd seen the blonde on the battlefield. 2 years to lie about his skills, because with Naruto's guidance he'd grown 100-fold stronger and faster than had he done it on his own. Yet it was still not enough. He and Izuna still could not take control of the Uchiha. These four before Madara and Izuna, kneeling with angry defiant scowls on their faces. They had tried. And for that treason, for that failure, they were to be put to death. 4 pairs of unmastered Sharingan swirled angrily towards 2 perfectly calm and controlled dojutsu. The bratling heirs to the clan, Madara and Izuna, completely emotionless. They obeyed their father's orders without hesitation. And what was worse, they were powerful. Extremely powerful. 16 and 14, yet both had managed to accomplish what those double and even triple their age could not. And their skill was still growing. They had 3 tomo while most could only hope to gain 2 by the time they were 20. Madara was using his Sharingan now, not a single tomo moving at all. A display of the control he applied, in essence, a true heir to the clan. Yet, why did they feel they could not place those 2 brats in charge? It was that uncertainty which had guided their admittedly foolish attempt to kill Taijima, a man as skilled as the Senju clan head and a man who had helped birth the 2 monsters he'd ordered to kill his own clansmen. The sentence for your treason is death. Be glad that I am merciful in this. I should have cut out your eyes and left you to the enemy. With that last cold statement of indifference, Taijima glanced, merely glanced, at his sons. They did not nod, they did not look to each other. They simply raised a kunai and struck, once, twice each, and the 4 Uchiha traitors were no more. Izuna and Madara had turned their heads down, standing straight and waiting for the order to say that they could leave. That waiting was a supreme effort of control. The blood was hot, the blood was wrong. This was the blood of their clansmen. Madara wanted to run from himself and that which he had to do, all in the name of the Uchiha clan. It wasn't the Uchiha that were so corrupt. No, it was Taijima. His father. One day. The day would come, where Taijima would no longer be able to control his sons, and when that day came things would get better. They had to. Madara knew he had to wait. He could not simply take control of the clan. He had to wait for his father to fall in battle. He had to go through the process naturally. Until then, he had no choice but to obey the man. Madara's gaze was turned towards the floor so that none could see the angry, hateful swirl within the blood red of his Sharingan. So was Izuna's. However, Madara still caught sight of the single clear and tiny droplet of salty liquid that fell to the ground at his baby brother's feet. That was what pushed him over even more than what he'd already been. A burst of anger at what he'd been forced to do to his own clansmen, and a burst of pain, of suffering, at the fact that his little brother had been forced to do it as well. Yet he could not even clench a fist to show this anger, this defiance. That would not be becoming the heir to the Uchiha clan. Later, when they were alone, staring at the darkened blood still staining their hands, Madara whispered his apologies, his promises to do better, to be a better leader. Izuna cried. He didn't say a word. He only cried. And when he looked up at Madara, pure anguish marring his still far too boyish features, Madara could only gap in surprise at the Sharingan that gazed back at him with such sorrow it was hard to believe that it was all felt by one person. Izuna's eyes were different. Brother, Aniki, it hurts so much. The sob of a child, so far from the killer he was capable of being. Izuna. Madara pulled the younger towards him, holding him close as he fell apart. I'll make it better. I promise. Konoha will be built. Peace will come. Izuna continued to sob. Great heart-wrenching sobs that told those who would listen of his suffering. Madara wished he could take away that pain, to pull it within himself so that Izuna would never have to feel so much torment again. Izuna cried more that night than any other night he had cried, and Madara sensed a change in the younger Uchiha. He just knew, without having to be told, that this was the last time he'd ever see his baby brother cry. Aniki. Izuna whispered hoarsely, once his crying had been quiet for much too long. Yet his pain was still so evident in those eyes that were more than simple Sharingan. Those eyes gazed up imploringly at Madara, wide with an innocence unfairly ripped from them far too long ago. Your eyes, they're different. They hold the same pain as I feel. And there, in the slight reflection of that tortured gaze, something more than mere Sharingan peeked back at Madara. His eyes were different too. 3 years after Naruto's arrival and Hashirama could finally say he'd managed to master his wood style. Oh, he'd managed to create the wood release long ago, but there had always been something missing. It had always felt like there needed to be more. And it had taken him this long to figure it out. Senjutsu. He had to master enough of Senjutsu to mix at least a slightly amount of it into his water and earth chakra. Senjutsu was the chakra of all living things. Wood was something that was alive, something that grew and became so much more. It made sense that with senjutsu mixed into his jutsu, it became powerful in a way that on a whole new level, a league entirely of its own. He could use his wood release in any situation, adapt it to whatever purpose he needed. It was instinctive to rely upon the ninjutsu and he hardly had to pause to come up with some innovative way to utilize it. So yes, he could say he'd mastered it. Hashi-kun? The 17-year-old turned towards the soft call of his name. He'd been training, staying in the forest more and more as he'd strove to master his bloodline and the use of senjutsu, and often, time would become alien to him. Mito-chan. A soft smile of adoration tugged at tired lips. Is it that late already? Hi. You should come home for dinner now. Mito grasped a calloused hand and held it close to her chest. You need rest. Nawaki-kun misses you. Nawaki is only a few months old. He doesn't even realize I'm gone. Hashirama still smiled brightly at the mention of his son. Hush. He knows when you're there. He's got that same silly smile of yours. Mito tugged on Hashirama's hand and began leading him back to their home. It was a small house, more on the edge of the clan compound than what the clan had felt right for the clan heir. But Hashirama had wanted the large space to be able to practice his ninjutsu freely while still being close to home. Tobirama was in a small house not too far, having chosen to move with Hashirama but not into the same house. The 15-year-old was far too independent for Hashirama's liking, but there wasn't much he could do about it. At least the other Senju had chosen to stay close by. Tobirama was there to greet them when they walked through the door, a bundle of blankets in his arms with only the smallest tuft of red poking through to show that Nawaki was within all that material. Hashirama's face split into a silly grin as he gently took the small child from his younger brother. It was times like these that only served to further strengthen Hashirama's resolve to bring Konoha to fruition. After all, he wanted his son to grow up in peace, not some meaningless clan war. He would achieve his goal. Just, sadly, not quickly enough to prevent Nawaki from being trained as a shinobi. Could they do that? Tobirama's eyes flickered over to Hashirama's, reflecting the depressing undertone that Hashirama's thoughts were following. Batsuma would order that Nawaki's training start the moment the boy could walk. Could Hashirama do it? Knowing that the moment his son was proficient enough he'd be sent out into battle, his chances of coming back very slim. The bright red hair, the chocolate brown eyes. He was the spitting image of his mother. If he inherited her chakra reserves, her sensing ability, Batsuma would not stand for Hashirama's choice to teach Nawaki another profession, something that wasn't a shinobi. As it was, Nawaki was related to Hashirama, and hadn't he already proven that he himself was a deadly shinobi with powerful chakra all of his own? Nawaki was genetically brilliant. There was a very slim chance that Nawaki wouldn't become an excellent shinobi. Could Hashirama do it? Could he train his son, with the hope that maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't die? There was only one solution. He would have to take over the clan before Nawaki was to be sent on his first mission. That was all there was to it. Hashirama would gladly kill his own father if it meant keeping his son safe. The worst part about it was, Hashirama had enough skill to get away with it. No one would ever know it was him, and the only one that ever had a chance of guessing was Tobirama. Tobirama wouldn't sell him out. No. The younger Senju would sooner help him than condemn him. For now, he would enjoy the peace and happiness his family afforded him. After all too soon, they would see the call of the battlefield once again. 4 years. That was how long it had been since Naruto had arrived in this world, and roughly 3.5 years since they'd seen Naruto at all. Mito hadn't even been allowed to see him when she went to visit the Uzumaki clan either, and returned after every visit with a frown of confusion. Yet she would not say more on the topic. Nawaki was a year old now. His chubby legs struggling to find purchase on the rough ground as he smiled at those around him. A part of Hashirama watched proudly as his son walked around them completely unaided, as he had been doing for some months. Another part of him grew despondent because he knew as sure as he took his next breath Batsuma would come here soon. No matter how slow a child was, all of them could walk soon enough. And he'd come to see if Nawaki had reached that point yet. And he'd be angry that Hashirama hadn't told him when the boy had learned how months ago. I wonder, brother, if he inherited my brains or yours. Tobirama joked with a small, rare chuckle. Humph, obviously it will be mine. Hashirama replied, he's my son. Oh, then I hope he inherited the Uzumaki's kami given luck as well. Toburama's smile widened a fraction just as Hashirama's cloud of doom spread above his hanging head as Hashirama muttered, "So mean. Quote. I just wonder if he's going to have that neat little bloodline of yours." Mito mused out loud. Can you imagine, a little Uzumaki with 2 bloodlines? I doubt he'd have the Uzumaki one though. I hope he doesn't. Uzumaki clan law dictates that all those with the Uzumaki bloodline must return to the clan compound. That would mean either I go with him, or we lose him. Mito's gaze was distant as she spoke of this possibility. A seemingly random series of thoughts, yet Hashirama knew his wife well enough by now to know that this had been bugging her for some time. But, she began with a silly smile directed at Nawaki before she scooped him up. Let us not dwell on that which is only slightly possible when there are so many other, much happier things to reflect upon. Hashirama stood for a moment, simply to let Mito's statement sink in. He'd never even thought of that possibility. Was it selfish to wish that Nawaki never developed a bloodline at all? If he did have a bloodline, he'd had an advantage in battle, he would be better than the average shinobi. That was good, wasn't it? Yet it was for that reason alone that Hashirama wished Nawaki did not have a bloodline. Because then he'd be just an ordinary Senju. Then he wouldn't be used as nothing more than a powerful tool. He wouldn't be used like Batsuma continuously used Hashirama and Toburama. He would just be an ordinary shinobi who was very skilled in everything he could possibly be skilled in. Because if Hashirama had to train his son to be a killer, he'd make sure he trained his son well. Madara's blade clashed loudly with that of Hashirama's. So it was only Kenjutsu this time, was it not? The same humdrum as it was before, and the time before that and the time before that. The same song and dance. A predictable series of events that were beginning to crack. Soon others would begin to notice and Madara did not have a way to explain. To explain why he did not try his very best to kill the Senju brat. To explain why they both walked away with minimal injuries. And so, Madara closed his eyes, stopped his Sharingan from seeing, as he ducked under the predictable swipe of Hashirama's blade and ran his own through the other shinobi's shoulder. There was no usual resistance of bone and flesh, no sickening suction as he pulled the sharpened blade free once more, Hashirama's cry of pain ringing in his ears. It was more effortless than what it had any right to be. In the briefest of moments, a moment that none would ever see or know about, Madara grabbed the back of Hashirama's neck and yanked the other's head towards him. Their foreheads crashed together and Madara opened his eyes to see Hashirama's features clenched in pain. Sacrifice, Watashi no Hitoshi. Madara whispered before letting go and jumping away from Hashirama. Why did you leave? And Uchiha demanded angrily. You'd finally managed to wound him. Madara did not say a word. He did not have to. Hashirama's blasted bloodline took effect and encased the Senju in a cocoon of wood. Immediately after that, Toburama arrived, eyes automatically finding Madara's. And within those chestnut irises, a deep burning coldness was directed at the Uchiha, so much so it was hard to believe that Toburama and Madara were comrades fighting for the same goal. Yet there was understanding as well. Toburama knew what Madara had done. Because I cannot deal with the other Senju brother as well. Madara replied tonelessly. One is enough of a headache and those two work together flawlessly as a team. Mito, said red-haired now Senju turned to the call, features serious as they registered the tone in which her name had been quietly uttered. Toburama. No kun. This wasn't a social call. The other was here for something. Something serious, something important. I require your assistance in something. Toburama looked away, eyes not meeting Mito's as he made his request. Whatever he wanted, it shamed him to ask for it, perhaps even to have it at all. It's a jutsu, that's based largely upon the sealing arts. Mito tilted her head slightly, taking in Toburama's features. Why would a jutsu shame the older ninja? Sealing? Mito asked instead of what she truly wanted to know. Hi. If done right, all I will need is a marker, placed on a surface in an area and I will be able to focus my chakra upon that mark and essentially teleport to that marker. I could be anywhere in an instant. It would really benefit the Senju on the battlefield. Toburama explained, his tone that of a shinobi, which meant that it was utterly toneless. He was hiding something. When it came to Toburama, the most telling thing was when there was nothing. Right now, Mito couldn't help but wonder that if helping her brother-in-law was really the right thing to do. But she couldn't say no. What he wanted, it truly did sound like a powerful jutsu. And a powerful jutsu would only help them. Then why was he so ashamed of it? Alright, Tobi-kun, I'll help you. At the very least you should use it to keep Hashi-kun safe. However, a sealing jutsu of this caliber will take time. More time than what you're estimating on. So you'll have to be patient as you work with me, and you will work with me. I won't help you otherwise. There's no point to any of this if you do not understand how your own jutsu works. That would likely end badly. Mito stated, and she noted the slightly relief that barely crossed Tobirama's features. She hoped that whatever he was planning, that he knew what he was doing and that he was willing to accept whatever consequences that might come with it. Madara scoffed as he faced his opponent. Not Senju. Not Uchiha. They didn't stand a chance. You Uchiha think you're so great with those Sharingan of yours. You don't know what it really means to be a shinobi. The enemy Madara was facing was perhaps a year, maybe 2 years older than him. Well, we aren't at the top of the clan wars for nothing. One of the Uchiha behind Madara scoffed. Why was it they never tried to help? Just because you can see better doesn't mean you can fight better. Try copy this, you monsters. I'll get you all for what you did to my family. Madara was forced to leap backwards when a shard of, was that ice? Whatever it was fast and it came out of nowhere. It was sharp too. The blood trailing from the cut on his cheek tickled slightly and Madara raised a hand to wipe it away. Whatever that brat did, I can't copy it. One of the two Uchiha with Madara growled. Bloodline then. The other responded. I'll handle this. Madara stated, and the two Uchiha immediately fell silent. Would Madara need to use his Mangekyo Sharingan for this? No, the older ninja wasn't skilled enough. He had raw power, but he wasn't skilled enough to actually use it in a way that would allow him to actually kill Madara. Even injuring the Uchiha heir was a stretch. So you can create and manipulate ice. An interesting bloodline. But is it enough? Madara commented as he regarded the older shinobi. Che. I guess we're just going to have to find out. Madara stood absolutely still as the other shinobi ran through the hand signs for an easily recognizable water jutsu. He already knew that he wouldn't have to move out of the way when the shinobi raised his hand to his lips and a spray of water was directed at him. For one thing, the shinobi hadn't placed enough chakra into the jutsu for it to have the force needed to project to where Madara was standing. If that was the way he was starting, he was sorely overestimating his own abilities. Madara tilted his head slightly when the shinobi smirked. Your arrogance will be your downfall, Uchiha Madara. Madara tensed when walls of ice sprang up from the puddle of water created by the water jutsu he'd thought had been useless. No, it hadn't been. It had only been the preparation. Still, this didn't change Madara's earlier assessment. He could still defeat the ice wielder. Let's see how much you can see when I can be anywhere I need to be before you've even noticed me move. The shinobi's smirk widened before he stepped backwards, the walls of ice having surrounded both Madara and himself. Madara was curious, nothing more, when the shinobi disappeared within his own creation, looking like a reflection in one of the ice ponds he and Izuna had played upon during particularly cold winters. He was less curious when a senbon flew at him from that very mirror, forcing him to step to the side in order to avoid it. So the shinobi could attack him, but he could not attack his enemy. That was smart, but he had to run out of senbon eventually, and in that event he'd have to attack directly. Madara could wait till then. He was patient. Another senbon flew at him, followed but a barrage more. They were simple enough to dodge, and Madara wondered why the shinobi had had such bravado. Then the reflection moved to another mirror, running the circumference of the mirrors as the shinobi threw his senbon. Madara scowled as some managed to sink into his shoulder. Madara was going to have to get creative to dodge if the shinobi could be in any mirror he desired. But then another revelation made itself known to the young Uchiha. The senbon was cold, almost to an icy degree. Tilting his head slightly, Madara watched the trajectory of one of the senbon, taking in the way it flew past his cheek and shattered upon impact of the mirror behind Madara. Ice senbon. The shinobi wasn't going to run out of weapons. He merely made more every time he needed them. Madara knew that now was the time to switch to attack. Defense was no longer enough. Using a fireball jutsu was second nature to him. So much so that he didn't even need to perform the hand signs. When the jutsu hit the mirror that held the reflection of the shinobi, it was powerful enough to completely shatter the mirror. However, Madara saw the way the shinobi flickered over to another mirror. More senbon flew at him, forcing Madara to duck away from the shattered mirror. It gave the ice wielder enough time to create another mirror. So as long as the mirrors stayed intact, the shinobi thought he could win. Well, that could be easily changed. Madara drew his sword before rushing straight for one of the mirrors. He was surprised when the mirror did not shatter the moment his blade impacted with the reflective surface. So they were stronger than what they originally appeared. Was ninjutsu strong enough to break them all? Well, that was a redundant question. Madara leapt away from the mirror and towards the center of the structure, eyes taking in the reflection of his enemy as the shinobi flickered from mirror to mirror. You'll find that my mirrors aren't as easy to break as all that, Uchiha Madara. You have yet to realize just how trapped you are. We shall see about that. I broke one of them, I'll do it again. Madara promised. Yet the second fireball he aimed at a mirror did not even make the mirror melt. Had the shinobi strengthened the mirrors for some reason? It would make sense after Madara's initial success in breaking one mirror. Therefore Madara could try increasing the strength of his jutsu. He could try a different jutsu, strengthen his ninja tools, or he could be a true Uchiha and use a different method entirely. However, up till this point he'd managed to not even activate his Sharingan, fighting this battle without them. There were no jutsu he could copy since he was fighting against a bloodline and his visual skills were far above exceptional without his Sharingan. With a sigh Madara closed his eyes, opening them again to reveal blood-red Sharingan. In the split second that the shinobi flickered to a stop in the mirror directly in front of the Uchiha, ready to throw more ice senbon, Madara's Tomo whirled and the genjutsu struck. Most enemy shinobi could not help the urge to look directly into a Sharingan, just to see the legendary dojutsu for themselves. It was usually the last thing they ever did. The hand that had been about to flick the senbon in Madara's direction went limp, and the shinobi fell out of his own mirrors. The moment he hit the ground, the mirrors shattered, leaving nothing but a puddle of water behind. Madara walked over to the shinobi, features completely blank as he took in the teen's frozen form. He bent down and tilted the older teen's head towards him. I think I shall let you live, Ice Wielder. Your skill is interesting. However, you have yet to learn how to properly use it. Keep in mind though, that should you ever face an Uchiha again, they will not extend the same courtesy. For that matter, a Senju might not either. There is a reason we are at the top of the clan wars. You'll do well to keep your mouth shut during the next battle you find yourself in, or at the very least have the skill to back up your boasting. As Madara walked away, he wondered just how far the Ice Wielder would get in these times of endless fighting. Had his family members he'd spoken of earlier had the same bloodline? It wasn't impossible. Yet it did not matter. Every jutsu had its flaw, its weakness. As an Uchiha, it was his job to see them and exploit them. Why did you let him live? One of his companions asked. Because I have what I need and killing him serves no purpose. Besides, perhaps if he grows powerful enough, he can be an adequate test of my strength, but I doubt that he will. He does not have the determination needed to defeat me. He did not have the look in his eyes of one dedicated to vengeance. For all intents and purposes, he's more of a child than I am. Madara replied. He won't be a threat to our clan. He simply does not have it in him. I hope you're right, Madara. A warning that should his words be untrue, then Madara would take the blame. It wouldn't be the first time and it probably wouldn't be the last either. Madara was 19 now, and he hadn't seen Naruto for 4.5 years. Usually, if a shinobi wasn't seen for even half a year it meant that the shinobi had died. But Naruto would not be that weak, would he? As it was the Uchiha clan heir was sitting quietly next to Izuna, a group of Uchiha with them. There were perhaps 10 of them in total and they were seated around a large fire, speaking amongst themselves. It was the day before a large mission, a mission large enough to warrant the need of both Izuna and Madara as well as 8 or so other Uchiha. It was their task to eradicate a whole other clan, so that the Uchiha could have their land and their measly wealth. It was a detestable mission. Oi, Madara-san, have you heard the rumors? One Uchiha stated loudly, forcing the young Uchiha to look towards the caller. He did not reply but rather raised a brow to prompt the other Uchiha to continue. About the shinobi who moves so fast all one sees of him is a yellow blur. Hi, and that his kenjutsu prowess is unmatched. And that his ninjutsu is powerful enough to change the landscape around him with only a single blow. Madara added. Hi, I've heard them. The shinobi they speak of is Uzumaki Naruto. Yet I have not met him in battle myself. You mean it's that blonde Uzumaki that was such a pathetic weakling some years back? The one that went completely berserk on the battlefield and tried to kill his own allies? One Uchiha scoffed, pulling his lip up in disgust. Hi, that very one. He is also the Uzumaki that stopped a clan fight between the Senju and the Uchiha. The unknown shinobi who wore a cloak and challenged the clan heads themselves. Izuna replied, "If he's so powerful, why isn't he fighting with the Senju? He used to, didn't he?" Hard to miss a blonde Uzumaki. Madara didn't reply, and neither did Izuna. It was a good question. One they did not have an answer to. They'd been fighting for days. Hashirama had been on the front lines for all of those hellish days, and even he was starting to run out of chakra. At this rate he'd grow too exhausted to be of much use. He didn't even know what they were fighting for this time. He was 19, yet he still felt like a child. Didn't his father think he was ready yet? When Hashirama had asked, he'd been told the same as always, which had been absolutely nothing. He'd been angry that day as well. Batsuma and Hashirama had been fighting again. Nawaki was 2 now, and Hashirama could not keep his father away any longer. It didn't help that the boy was clearly intelligent for his age. It didn't help that he had his mother's reserves. At this point, Hashirama almost wished Nawaki had the Uzumaki bloodline, just so that his son would go back to the Uzumaki clan. He'd be safer there than with the Senju. Yet at the same time, he could not bear to let his son go. How had his father done this? Not just once, but 4 times? So yes, when he'd first been told of the fighting, he'd been all too happy to have something to vent his frustrations out on. He knew he wasn't always violent and he was often called weak because he was more merciful than most. But he was a shinobi like any other, and he was a killer just like them. His opponents were weak, always falling before him. How was that even fair? Why were some shinobi just so much better than others? Why did it have to be him? All he wanted was to bring peace to this world. All he wanted was to end the fighting. In an ironic twist of fate, he just happened to be the best killer on this field. Madara wasn't here. In fact, their opponent this time wasn't even the Uchiha. It was rare when that happened. An enemy would hire another clan, one they felt would garner more success or one they trusted more. Yet it wouldn't work. Only the Senju could fight the Uchiha and only the Uchiha could fight the Senju. That was just the way it had always been. However, his anger had long since passed, leaving nothing but the same sense of regret, the same deep exhaustion. He just wanted it all to end. He wanted Konoha. The call for the retreat came and Hashirama cringed. It was only a temporary one. A slight truce from both clans, where at the end of each day they retreated, with the unspoken agreement to keep the peace during the night. So far, such an agreement had only been broken once. It hadn't ended well for either of the clans involved. Hashirama was exhausted, but he knew that he wouldn't be getting any sleep tonight, same as all the previous nights upon this field. Hashirama-san. Despite his exhaustion, the Senju heir snapped his attention to the call of his name, his training picking up on the urgency within the tone. "You must come quickly. It's your brother." Hashirama felt his world collapse around him. He was sure his face was pale and his eyes wide. Heck, his mouth had probably flopped open as well. Then he was running. Despite how tired he was, despite how much his blood had frozen, he was running as fast as he could to where the other shinobi was leading. "Tobi." Hashirama burst into the tent that had been set up as a makeshift infirmary. The fact that his brother was here was bad in itself because most of the shinobi on the field didn't have the medical experience and knowledge needed to actually care for the wounded. All the infirmary tent really was a quiet place to die if someone managed to get one there in time. Only a few ever managed to make it out alive. Hashirama-san. One of the shinobi near his fallen brother looked to the call and relief flashed in her eyes. Not many female became ninja, but some did. Most looked to go into the medical field, preparing and administering bandages for the most part. Hashirama had more medical experience than any of the shinobi in this tent, and he was perhaps the only one that could help his brother now. He rushed towards the small cluster of shinobi only to see his baby brother lying on a mat, eyes clenched in pain as he bit his bottom lip to stop a scream from leaving his mouth. Blood. There was so much blood. What happened? Hashirama demanded. From what we can understand, he attempted a jutsu that didn't end well. He has sustained damage from both the jutsu and an enemy that took advantage of his weakness. It wasn't ready. Mido-chan told me it wasn't ready, but I didn't listen. Tobirama managed to spit out. I was desperate. I need that jutsu Aniki. Tobirama was 17 and he hadn't called Hashirama Aniki in years. Don't talk right now, Otouto. You need your strength. Hashirama dropped to his knees and spread his hands over his younger brother's chest. The armor had already been removed, leaving nothing but the dark underclothes that Tobirama usually wore around the compound. "Don't. I can sense your chakra, Aniki. You're too tired for this." Tobirama whispered. "Don't you ever tell me not to try and save your life again, Baka." Hashirama glared at his brother with such rage that the younger didn't try to say anything again. There were very few times that Hashirama acted the older brother that he was, and this was one of those times. In those times Tobirama knew better than to even think about arguing. Yet, despite Hashirama's resolve to heal his brother, Tobirama was right. He didn't have the chakra needed. For one thing, the chakra needed to heal his brother would have to be intense, concentrated, which meant a lot more than what Hashirama had. But he had to try. He couldn't give up. This was Tobirama. He couldn't stop now. The green chakra surrounded his hands and began to sink into his brother's body. With this connection, Hashirama began to feel the extent of the damage that his brother had sustained, and what he felt shocked him. It was as though some of his brother's very cells had been shifted out of place. What kind of a jutsu had he been trying? There was also the vast amount of damage done by the enemy's sword. A sword that had cruelly and so inhumanly been serrated, so as to cause the utmost damage with the least amount of blows. Otouto. Hashirama whispered, not daring to open the eyes that he'd closed. He did not want to see his brother's eyes right now. He could feel his brother's chakra slipping, feel the way his brother's body sluggishly attempted to keep functioning. He'd felt a shinobi die before, but he'd never imagined he'd have to feel it within his brother. "Don't you dare give up on me, Tobirama. I still need you. What about Konoha? You have to help me." Hashirama's eyes flew open, despite his earlier thoughts. Tobirama's eyes were beginning to glaze over. "I'm so sorry, Aniki." The younger Senju sighed. No. Hashirama needed to increase the concentration of the chakra he was using to heal his brother, but he was already giving it all he had. In fact, he was soon going to run out. "Tobi. No. Don't leave me." Tobirama's chakra slipped a little more and Hashirama choked on a sob. "Please Tobi, don't go." Hashirama saw the green of his own healing chakra begin to fade, watched as Tobirama grimaced in pain because of it. Then he saw the one thing he had never hoped to see within his brother's eyes. Peaceful acceptance. That was the look only a shinobi who had acknowledged their situation and had accepted it got. It was the look of a shinobi who knew they were going to die. Hashirama had never seen it upon the face of a comrade that had made it out alive, and it made his heart freeze. Anger and determination burst to life within him, and he refused to let his baby brother die. "No." He found himself growling. "I was powerless to help our brothers, but I'm not powerless now. I am Senju Hashirama. I am the founder of Konoha, and I will not stand at the head of the Senju clan alone. You will live." Inspiration hit, and hit hard. Hashirama needed more chakra, and so did his brother. There was chakra all around them. In every living thing. Senjutsu. Hashirama already knew how to focus senjutsu due to his wood release, and now he was going to mix it with his medical ninjutsu. Senjutsu was life, and it had to save his brothers. Green grew brighter, changing to the purest white as Hashirama focused undiluted senjutsu into his body, threw it and straight into Tobirama. Tobirama gasped in surprise, eyes growing wide as the distant look was flooded out with pure stunned amazement. Hashirama did not stop even when his brother cried out in pain and began to squirm beneath his hands. "Hold him down," he ordered to those that had been merely watching up till this point. It hurt because it sped up the healing process 100-fold. The damage that Tobirama had done to his own body warranted a lot of healing, a lot of excruciating pain. Tobirama's cells had to be rearranged in order to fix what the jutsu had broken. With this sudden inspiration to use senjutsu in medical ninjutsu came a barrage of other ideas, all to be addressed and sorted through at a later stage. For now though, he was going to focus on his brother. "You will live, Tobirama. You don't get to die and leave me here." Hashirama glared at his brother. His brother had looked at him with those eyes. Those eyes he had seen 1,000 times before, and something within the older Senju had snapped. "As long as I'm alive, you don't get to die." Tears blurred Senju Heir's vision, and he was surprised that he hadn't started crying ages ago. A hand weakly brushed against Hashirama's wrist before falling back to the ground. Tobirama's way of apologizing. The pain grew too much for the teen, his eyes rolling back before his body went limp. He'd lost consciousness and no longer needed to be restrained. Yet there was still more healing to be done. Hashirama refused to stop until his Otouto was in nothing but the perfect condition. Anything less simply would not do. 3 days later Tobirama woke up in his room in the Senju compound. He sat up carefully, far too used to being injured to sit up too quickly. What had his brother used to heal him? It had felt completely different, something more. Getting to his feet, Tobirama paused to test his balance. He felt fine. No, he felt amazing. Better than what he had in ages. Walking to the door, he sensed the guard waiting outside before he was even 10 steps away. Could the guard tell him what had happened? "Where is my brother?" Tobirama asked as he opened the door. "Tobirama-san." He was greeted with a bow. "Hashirama-sama is resting. He lost consciousness shortly after tending to your wounds and has yet to awaken." The mission was a success. Batsuma-sama arrived to take over after word of Hashirama-sama's condition reached him. "Hashirama-sama?" Tobirama questioned, features remaining blank. Hi. Batsuma-sama did not return from the battle. So his father had died. And it wasn't even at the hands of the Uchiha. Tobirama closed his eyes. The jutsu he'd asked Mito to help him with, it meant nothing now. Its only purpose had been so that Tobirama could kill his own father without anyone ever catching him. A jutsu that could let him teleport anywhere where he'd placed a marker meant that he could place a mark on his father and kill him before disappearing to another setup marker. For all the other Senju knew, he wouldn't even be in the village when his father was killed. But the jutsu hadn't been ready yet. Even after he'd killed his father, he could see the benefits of such a jutsu on the battlefield and it would have been a great advantage. However, it would appear he did not have to kill his father after all. Nawaki would be safe now. Hashirama's happiness would be safe. Tobirama could not say if his tears were relief for the fact that he no longer had to bear the burden of killing his own father, or sadness for the fact that his father was dead. Whatever the reason, he did not care. He roughly wiped them away from his face before he continued walking, planning on going to his brother, who was now also his clan head. "Madara-sama," said Uchiha paused at the entrance of the compound, returning from a mission. "What has happened in my absence?" he asked tonelessly. Uchiha did not make mistakes, and if this Uchiha was calling him Sama instead of San, then something had happened. "Your father fell in battle." "I see. Has my brother been informed?" "No. He has yet to return from his mission." "Madara-sama." Madara paused for a moment more. "Was the battle one with the Senju?" "No. The mission was a routine mission that went bad." "What was my father doing on a routine mission and how did someone manage to kill an Uchiha, much less the clan head, on a routine mission gone bad?" Madara turned a cold gaze to the Uchiha, daring him to try and lie. "It is unknown. None of the Uchiha managed to survive. However, their eyes were all intact. None were taken." Madara looked away. Something wasn't right there. But he had more important things to go through. Such as the clan affairs. He was now their leader. A position he'd been born for, yet one he still found himself thrust within. "Inform me at once when my brother returns." Madara snapped before continuing to walk further into the compound. Something wasn't right, but it would have to wait till later. Naruto stood atop the cliff that would later become the Hokage monument. From there he could just make out both the Senju and the Uchiha compounds. It was almost time to bring the clans together, but he needed to wait. Hashirama and Madara were now the newly appointed clan heads and they needed time to build trust. The clan had to follow them to Konoha, and for that they needed to trust their clan heads. So time was needed. Naruto wondered if anyone would ever figure out that he was the one that had killed both the precious Uchiha and the Senju clan heads. He doubted it. After all, a henge did wonders and a henge enforced with a seal did even more. He'd learned a lot in the 5 years that he'd been in this world. And he'd been watching over his precious people for the 4.5 years they had not seen him. He'd seen Nawaki's birth and Madara and Izuna's Mangekyo Sharingan activation. He'd even seen the beginnings of the creation of the Flying Thunder God technique. That one had been particularly painful because it had confirmed to him that his father's greatest technique hadn't really been his to start with. However, that didn't dampen his father's brilliance. After all, there was still the Rasengan and the seal that contained the Kyuubi within Naruto. He was 21 years old now. And he was almost ready to build Konoha. Naruto smirked to himself. He was different, but he liked to think he was still the same. His ninja way was still the same and he still believed that everyone had the ability to be good. But he'd lost most of his naivety and he'd grown somewhat weary within these war-torn times. Naruto took a step back, shoes crunching in the sand as he did so. He'd changed the way he dressed as well, choosing to wear the black and red cloak from his fight with Pain as well as his orange armor. The armor itself has been adjusted, redesigned to be sleeker, lighter. It helped him to move faster. Now you can begin your search for the others, Naruto. Kurama grumbled. Hi, now that I've perfected a way to keep the tailed beasts out of human hands, I can begin. When I return, I will be ready to become the Uzumaki clan head and in doing so, bring the 3 clans together to build Konoha. I just hope that those 4 don't go and do something stupid while I'm gone. Naruto replied out loud, uncaring of the fact that he looked utterly insane, appearing to be talking to himself. They are the legends that you grew up listening about, therefore they will survive. Kurama scoffed. Now let us leave. I grow impatient. Soon, all too soon, Konoha would be built. Chapter 10. End. And that is it for this couple of chapters. Thank you all so much for watching. See you all later and bye.